Welcome, Bill. And, this is Bill DeLibero. He's our first town manager finalist and first interview this morning. I'm just going to introduce the members of the board.
Okay.
I'm Andrew Burbine, Mike Franey, Kevin Donovan, Ken Coyle, and Tom Dion. As far as the interview process today, what we're going to do is going to give you a brief opening statement, some brief opening remarks. Then there'll be questions by the board members, any questions that you have of us, and then we'll permit you to have a brief closing statement. Okay? The plan is we'll be discussing the appointment of the town manager on Monday night at our regular meeting. And we'll contact, if we do take a vote that night, we'll contact all the candidates either way, yes or no. So before you leave, if you can just give me a good number to get in touch with you before you go, I'd appreciate that. So it's all yours at this point, and if you can just give us a brief introduction, that'd be great.
Okay. Again, I'm Bill DeLibero, and I'd like to start with what I've been doing in the past 11 months since I left service in Charlestown, Rhode Island. The first thing I did when I left was I worked as a municipal prosecutor. I volunteered to work with a local prosecutor for one of the cities, East Providence, and went to court 2 days a week and did prosecution. I'm trained as an attorney. And it gave me an opportunity to spend some time in the courtroom in front of a judge, because even though I've been an attorney for 20 years, working in government, most of my practice, so to speak, has been doing municipal work, administrative law, human resources law, land use law, and not being in a courtroom, because there wasn't that opportunity. So it was a good practice for me to work with the police officers doing the prosecution work with the municipal prosecutor to see, to get some experience doing that. Subsequently, I was contracted with a law firm that does human resources work, and I've actually done 2 projects with them. One project was to do an investigation for a housing authority where their human resources department had claims filed against them. So I had to go in and do interviews to conduct the investigation and write a decision as to whether there was wrongdoing or not. Most recently, I've rewritten job descriptions for a municipality to give the town council, the select board, more leeway in being able to let their department staff assign staff the way they would like them, because it's a community with staff, and someone's out from the office, and you want to be able to assign someone else to work in that department. And so we rewrote job descriptions for that. And then what I'm doing right now is I'm contracting with the community to be their zoning official. So in doing that, I'm reviewing land use plans and permits for variances and special use permits, and providing counsel to the zoning board at zoning meetings. And one of the big things we have going on right now is siting a solar facility in a well field. And I know you're looking at doing a solar siting on your landfill possibly. So I'm getting to meet some of the players regionally that do the solar work, and the consulting firms that do the engineering for that. So that's beneficial. Overall, though, I think 2 things that I bring to the town is, one, having the legal experience, and I know you have attorneys on the select board, but to have another attorney involved that can help to make legal-based decisions on some of the things that you're working on, because most of the towns in Rhode Island have a full-time solicitor who is there at every meeting, every council meeting, every planning board meeting, every zoning board meeting. And so rather than having to go out and contract with your legal counsel for some of the things you can do, more can be done in-house, because I have that legal background. Another background of mine, I think, that I have myself that the other candidates don't have, is I'm trained as a land use planner. And one of the first things I did was to look at the town's community plan to see what the town's interest was as far as developing the community, and the interest in conservation and open space protection, the interest in transit-oriented development and trying to do something with the train station and bring in commercial and business development, and bringing in technology as well. As a planner, those are skills that I have: economic development, land use, and working. A couple of projects I've worked on have been doing tax stabilization, where we set up a schedule for taxations for new companies coming into the town that I worked in, to help to encourage companies to come in and set up in the town. And over it would be 5 years before they were at 100% taxation, and it was very helpful. So I think my skills in economic development, my skills in planning, my legal skills are all assets that I can bring to the community.
Great. Thank you. Mike, you can ask the first question.
Bill, can you tell me what the most controversial issue you faced as a town manager is, and just a little bit about what happened and how it was resolved, please?
Well, in two situations, I had instances where I had to terminate employees. In one case as a town manager, where it was a decision that I made myself. Another case as a town administrator, where I had to recommend to the board that this employee should be terminated. Department heads. One case, it was an issue where favoritism was being done by an official for board members, and people weren't being treated fairly, and there were some issues that it had to be done. So the termination was done, and it's the overall things that follow up. And there was a lawsuit filed against me, against the board, against employees, and it took 5 years to resolve. And it's just the time, the challenge of documenting things and make sure it's done right, the time it takes to replace someone, and the implications of settling a lawsuit. The same thing where I let an employee go in the last town that I worked in, Charlestown, where it was just that employee was creating a bad environment for the rest of the employees, the other department heads, and the person was not following my directives. So, again, it was difficult. There's a lawsuit pending. I'm indemnified by the town. It'll be multiple years before it's resolved. You know, what I found is you work with the department heads. If you can, you work with what you have and try and get the best situation you can, and as a last resort, you let someone go. You know, when you have to do it, you have to do it, but it's a challenge.
Thank you.
Kevin?
Welcome.
Thank you.
Could you elaborate for me the form of government in Rhode Island, and I want to focus in primarily in your capacity as town administrator and town manager. Can you explain, the setup in Rhode Island in terms of the town council versus Massachusetts, where we have open town meeting, and if you could
Okay.
elaborate on that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, similarly, you mean the financial town meeting, or?
Just the form of government, I
Okay.
guess, if you could explain.
Well, town councils have they've open public meetings. They're very transparent. The two towns that I've worked in, we video our meetings. The last town, we streamed our meetings. You can watch them on the website. Many council meetings are the meeting rooms are filled, so people come when there are contentious issues. One of the differences in most of the Massachusetts towns, there's staggered terms for select board members. In most of the Rhode Island towns, every 2 years, the full board runs for office. So you can have a year where you get a whole new board of town councils, and you have to train them and get them to operate, and then the last 6 months they're running for office. So you really have 1 year out of 2 where you have a well-functioning board. Interaction with the governor is similar. We face the same situations you face here, where you're waiting for the state budget to come out and find out how much less money you'll have allocated this year as opposed to the next year, and try to do your budget based on the budget coming from the state, and working closely with the legislators to try and get that number as best as you can before you develop your budget. I've testified before the legislature. We've had a very interactive governor in Rhode Island over the past couple of years. Governor Chafee will come out and meet with the town managers probably every 5 or 6 months, they'll come and have lunch with us, and we sit in a room and talk about issues. It's very similar. I've been in towns where we've had financial town meetings where they vote for a budget and at the town meeting. In one town, I was there when we transitioned from a financial town meeting to a financial town referendum, where the town adopts, the council adopted the budget, and then it goes to a vote, and the citizens vote, have the opportunity to vote all day for the budget, and it's either the whole thing passes or the whole thing fails, and there's a mechanism in place where you would redo the budget if the budget fails. And I've been in towns that have had that. I haven't worked in towns that were large, where the council members by district and they vote. Well, I shouldn't say that. Cumberland I did, but I was the planning director, not the manager, where they voted for the budget. The council voted for the budget as opposed to the general public voting for a budget.
Follow up if I could. In terms of the council, is the council more an executive or legislative body?
It's more legislative. I mean, they're there to set policy. They're very similar to the select board.
Okay, so in terms of, I guess in my own mind, I'm trying to picture, if the council, if they're more of a legislative than the town, in both Hopkinton and Charlestown, you were more the executive function, would that be a fair statement?
That's true. And as a manager in Hopkinton, I did the hiring, firing from, all the way up to the top. I worked with my finance department to create the budget. The budget went to the council. The council moved it to the public for a vote. And as a town administrator, I made recommendations to the council. In both cases, policy, the council voted on policy. I would do research, make recommendations to the council for initiating policies, or ordinances and town regulations.
And lastly, if I could, just as a follow-up, in terms of your interaction with the public, again, Rhode Island, speaking Rhode Island, Massachusetts, specifically Abington, we have open town meeting where any registered voter can come to town meeting. Is there a like function in Rhode Island based on your experience in these positions that have?
It's the same. Anyone can, the council meetings, unless there's an executive session, the public meeting's open to the public, and if there's an executive session, then the council comes out of an executive session and makes a public vote.
Okay,
And anyone in the public can come in. And my role is, I interact with the public. My door's open and public comes in and.
Okay, but in terms of the people actually voting on the budget, they don't, it's based from what the council does? Is that what, am I correct?
They vote on, if it's a financial town meeting,
Yeah.
they can raise questions about individual line items and ask to have a line item changed. When it's a referendum, that's done before the council adopts the budget. So I could go to the council meeting where they're talking about the budget. They have a public hearing on the budget, and I can say, why is the planning department budget's at this much? I don't understand why you have this amount in for travel. I think it should be reduced. I think it should be changed, and the council can make a motion to change it from $1,000 to $500 and line item by line item, similar to what could happen in a financial town meeting. And once they set the budget goes to a vote, all up or all down.
Very good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ken?
Bill, the questions that I'm going to ask you are, you've actually probably already gotten from the search committee that I was on. But these questions are the ones that kind of brought up the difference between the four candidates, and I think people want to know the answers to these questions. So I guess the first question I have for you is, Abington has a newly formed union which consists of some of our department heads, such as the assistant town manager. How might this situation affect your ability to manage effectively?
In both Charlestown and Hopkinton, Charlestown had what was called the Charlestown Professional Managers Association, CPMA. And it wasn't a union to the extent that they were part of ASME or Teamsters or anything like that. But they had a set of standards for promotions and a salary scale and benefits and all of that. And it worked very well. And likewise, in Hopkinton, the department heads were part of ASME, and they did have a business agent that would come in and negotiate contracts. So it's, and my mind, when I've worked with both groups, when we start, what we try to do is have all the contracts done at the same time, so that we're not staggered years for this one, next year we do that one, but have year one, we do department heads, clerical, public works, police, the whole group of them, one after another. And I'd like to start with department heads, because that sets the tone for where the town's going. So when you sit down to meet with the clerical staff, you said, well, this is the approach we took with the department heads, and we want to do the same. We want, and meet with the department heads and say, this is where we are financially, and we need your assistance as department heads to set the tone as to where the town needs to go. And it brings the department head into the financial planning for the community, and it helps in moving things forward. So it's worked out well. And like I said, in both Hopkinton and Charlestown, I've had to work with professional groups, in one case a union, in another case an association. And I like that model, rather than trying to contract one-on-one with each department head.
Back to that, if I could just have, now, would you have a problem, because one of the issues that I think people have is the assistant town manager will be in that union. Would that be a problem with you or an issue with you, working, in that capacity?
I think it depends on what the interaction is. I mean, I've dealt with the police union where the police chief was in the union. And so when we started to negotiate or plan out where we needed to go with the contract, the police chief was there talking and meeting with us to kind of lay out where we needed to go. But then when it came down to sit down and negotiate, that person was out of the process, because he's on both sides. So, it really depends on the relationship, the interaction with that person. But I think it's resolved. It's not an issue.
Tom?
Bill, I have to say, I enjoyed reading your resume. My question is, could you relate for the board to tell us about some sort of conflict you might have had with a superior or a board member or perhaps a colleague? What happened? What were the results? How was it resolved? And what might you have done differently?
I guess one of the conflicts I had with my recreation director in Charlestown was, we have a park, an airfield that was converted to a park. A chunk of it went to the federal government for fish and wildlife and is very well protected. Another part went to the town, which has some protections on it, and a third part went to the town with no protection. And that's where we have our ball fields, our tennis courts, and all of that. So my recreation director wanted to put lights in the park, because it makes sense. If you have a park, you want to light it at night so that adults at work can play tennis at night, or you could have softball games at night and that sort of thing. And there was a lobbying group trying to prevent lighting in the park. So my department head came to me with an email he wanted to send out, looking for support for the lights. So I looked at the email and I said, I need to tone this down a little bit. And I rewrote the email and gave it back to him and said, here, you can send it out like this. He sent the email out, but one conversation we didn't have was, who is it going to? And it ended up that he sent it out selectively to people that he wanted to come in and lobby for him, rather than as an information piece to everyone. And as soon as I found out that happened, within 2 hours of him sending it, I looked at the list and I went and I said, you need to send this, you can't select people, you need to send this out to the public. And so we did, but the fact that there was that lag in there created a problem, and it was my fault for not screening, having the conversation, who are you targeting to give this information to? So it created a conflict, like I was allowing my department head to lobby for this as opposed to provide educational information about why it's important to have these. And I took the fault for it. I said, that's my fault. I should have done a better job at screening this before I let it go out. So, and that's what I support my team. If, you know, someone came to me and said, you need to reprimand this person, I said, I can't. This is something I authorize, so if someone's at fault, I'm the one at fault. I
Thank
think
you.
I would have done a better job if it happened again.
Thanks.
What's that, Tom? Bill, I know you've been 2 places in the last 6 years?
6 years.
And I'm sure you've looked at other towns to
Mhm.
find employment also. Is there something about Abington that you find attractive, or what attracted you to apply for the position in Abington?
Well, I'm from Massachusetts, and there are parts of Massachusetts government that I think works better than Rhode Island. The fact that you don't elect everyone every 2 years, I think creates dysfunction in local government. I think, I like the town, it's a nice town, and it's, in seeing your municipal buildings the other day, I think it's great that you have, that the capital improvements have been maintained in the town, and I think good buildings for employees who work and create good employees, because they have a good environment to work in. I like the size, it's similar to the size of the town I've worked in, and the budget is consistent. I have not had the opportunity to work with the school system, because I've been in with regional school systems. And it's something I look forward to. I think that's a place where we can really see some efficiencies and costs by looking at back-end things, finance things that you can do jointly, public works things that you can do jointly, technology things that you can. So there are a number of things that you can reduce costs for a town by sharing services, and that's something I would like to move forward. So I like the town, the looks of the town, the location, and the buildings, the staff that I met seemed really great.
Thank you. Mike?
Bill, what has been the most significant achievement in your career so far, and what makes it significant?
I guess I talk about 2 things. One is the economic development that we did in Hopkinton. Both Hopkinton and Charlestown have, for the most part, no public water, no public sewer. In Hopkinton, Route 95, it's the first exit coming from the south on 95 into Rhode Island. And it was pretty much surrounded by agricultural land. Before I got there was a proposal to bring big boxes in. And the community railed against it and created a moratorium against any building. When I got in there, the moratorium had just been lifted, and we worked to do economic development, not big boxes, but mixed use. So we'd have technology, we'd have commercial, we'd have residential. And this was going from 2006 on, and we were very successful in bringing in close to $500,000 square feet of manufacturing into the area, a new restaurant. We had plans for a mixed-use development of housing and commercial, and then the economy went soft, and we weren't able to move that forward. But I think through the tax stabilization that we created, that allowed companies to come in and over 5 years get to 100% taxation. It was very effective, and it did a lot to improve the tax base for the community. The other thing is I've created municipal courts in the 2 towns that I've worked in. Rhode Island allows a town to set up its own court, and the main benefit of it is you're able to handle housing and land use issues, zoning violations, minimum housing violations, because those types of issues you bring to a district or superior court, and Massachusetts has a land court. Rhode Island doesn't. So you get in front of a judge, and the judge doesn't want, the calendars are so backed up that they don't want to be hearing those things. So by having a municipal court, and the other thing you do, you can bring in the traffic. So any speeding tickets under 10 miles per hour, you can handle locally. So there's a mechanism to fund the court through traffic. If you run the court during the day, you can use staff that you have, so you're not paying excessive salaries to have people run the court. And the other thing in Rhode Island, local attorneys are appointed as municipal judges. So you have a municipal probate judge, municipal court judge is a local attorney that serves as the judge. So that's done on a relatively low fee as well. And it worked very well in both towns where we have the mechanisms to run a court. So if I had a situation, someone kept throwing their cat litter in the street. And to bring that to district court, the judge doesn't want to hear it. The attorney would be continuing it and never get resolved. You summons them to go to local court, and they know the next time they're there, they're gonna have to address the judge. They'll take care of it. So I was very happy I was able to develop in both communities.
Thank you.
And I should say, from that I went from writing enabling legislation to bring to the legislature to have that adopted, writing the ordinance for the town, creating all the paperwork and forms. So from soup to nuts, all of the whole process, I was involved in developing.
Thank you.
If I could focus perhaps on your planning experience, and something you said in your opening remarks kind of piqued my interest. You had mentioned that in your capacity as a planner, you were interested or had developed or had studied the transit-oriented development approach.
Right.
And based on what you're saying, you, in your positions as town administrator and town manager, equalized in Massachusetts, you're familiar with TIF arrangements.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me, and obviously you've done research in Abington and the region, can you tell me how that would benefit Abington, specifically the transit-oriented piece, if you could?
And, well, it would in a couple ways. One, you're far enough away from Boston where the real estate prices are lower. So pretty much what you have is in that Cambridge, Boston circle around MIT and Harvard, you have the startups going. And they need a place to bring their first generation of production and work to be done before it gets farmed out to more remote areas. And I think Abington has the potential to do that. You build that around the train system, and it creates the ability for employees to come out to work, as well as for local people to live and go into Boston, Cambridge area to work. It gives you the opportunity to create workforce housing, and a lot of communities, not suburban communities, have single-family housing, but they don't have a lot of opportunities for the younger adults. I think many people have families at the age where they'd like to have their young adults still living close by, and there's not the opportunity to do that, to have quality housing for them to live and still be close to home. And so they end up having to move to a bigger urban area to live, because the opportunity isn't there for them to be somewhere else other than to buy a single-family house. And let's face it, not everyone wants to buy a single-family house or is ready to buy a single-family house. So it creates a housing opportunity, it creates job opportunities here, it creates transportation opportunities for people to be able to commute into the city to work. So I think it benefits all that way. And along the TIF lines, what I've been thinking about, I know you're having difficulties with the wastewater with Brockton. And by doing a TIF, you could use some of that TIF money to invest in the wastewater system and look at whether improvements, doing a study as to whether improvements need to be done, and using that money to improve the system to gain more access, more flow from Brockton, because from what I understand, they pretty much put the brakes on capacity for the town. And by doing improvements to the system through a TIF, you could get more capacity that way.
Just one quick follow-up, if I could. Could you, on both Charleston and Hopkinton, what are the respective populations?
Hopkinton was 8,000, and mainly residential. There, I believe 80 cents of the dollar went to education, or very close to that. Charlestown was 8,000, which tripled in size in the summer because they have a large summer population, and a lot of, it's the coastal part where you have houses on the salt ponds and on the ocean, and then the northern part, which are generational families that have lived in that area. So it's a real mixed population, and it goes from 8,000 to well over 20, probably 24,000 in the summertime.
Great, thanks very much.
Ken?
As in most towns, Abington is the same. We are very concerned about how to improve and maintain property values. Other people are concerned about how to limit their tax bill increases, and others still think there's an immediate need for greater investment in our education system. In many ways, these issues are all interrelated. As town manager, how would you attempt to address these issues and prioritize the needs of the community?
Well, I think one thing the residential communities are seeing is that education dollars tend to go to the larger areas. Boston, Worcester, Springfield, the bigger cities, and you see less education dollars being distributed to suburban communities. So it's incumbent on the town to try and build their tax base to support this, to spend more money supporting the tax system. So, or the school system, I'm sorry. So that brings us to trying to do smart growth in economic development, and that's a planning function as well. And looking at planning, figure out the best places for where you want your businesses to be, and then try and move some economic development. I mean, you have a good road infrastructure, you have the train infrastructure, you have water supply, and you have some sewer. So the potential is there. In my mind, it's much easier to work in a community like this that has that infrastructure than communities that don't have water, that don't have sewer. Hopkinton, we were lucky we had 95 going through there, and we were always moving and trying to bring economic development projects in. Charlestown wasn't that situation where we didn't have a major road, and there wasn't, with a retirement community, there wasn't an interest in bringing economic development in. And then the other thing I think you have with the town is you have the potential for, like, the solar project, which you could do a distributive energy, bring a company in to build that on the landfill, and you start looking at income generated that way as well, which will, the more revenue you can generate for the town, the better it helps your tax base and your goals of protecting open space, providing better education, and the quality of life issues.
Okay, thank you.
Tom?
Bill, describe your budgeting experience and methodologies. I'm interested in your approach to budget creation and budget management in a municipal environment of constrained revenue growth and costly unfunded government mandates.
I've done budgets with a finance committee and without a finance committee. When I worked without a finance committee, I sat down with a finance department, town treasurer, and we looked at prior year's budgets and where they were, and looked to see where we could find some improvements in the budget. I sit down with the treasurer and develop my budget, meeting with department heads, particularly bigger departments, public service, with public safety, where you have more minimums that you have to meet for staffing, for equipment, for number of policemen on patrol, dealing with overtime issues and getting those taken care of, taking care of public works. You have a bad year like this year where you're spending a lot of money on snow removal and trying to figure out the best number for that, and then working with, you have your fixed numbers, utilities, insurance, pensions, retirement, whatever you have. I know you have some pension and you have some defined contribution. So dealing with those, and then looking at what's left and seeing how you can tweak things. Figuring out fees, what you're going to have for fees coming in, whether it's going to improve or decrease, what your collection rates are for tax rates, putting a budget together. I prefer working with the finance committee, sitting down with the finance committee and then going through it again. And again, line item by line item, to see where the finance committee thinks things need to be tweaked. Doing another redo of, so you have the manager's budget, the finance committee's budget, and it goes to the select board. And I'm not sure, do you adopt the finance committee's budget before it goes to a public meeting, or do you use the finance committee's?
At town meeting, finance committee recommendation is the
Okay.
first recommendation taken.
So, I mean, I've done it with the and typically in Charlestown, the council would adopt the finance committee's budget, and then it would go to public vote. So I've done it without a finance committee, with a finance committee. I prefer to do it with a finance committee, and just because you get that extra iteration before it goes to the public. And you have a lot of fixed costs. I mean, that's just, you have a school budget, you work with the school and trying to reduce their budget. You work with your bigger departments and see where you can tweak things. Very important to have a capital budget and a capital plan. In both Charlestown and Hopkinton, Rhode Island has a rule where they require the town to do a capital plan, but they don't require the town to adopt it. So in some towns, they're very strict about doing capital planning and capital budgets, and both Hopkinton and Charlestown, they didn't do that. And my feeling is it's important to look at your capital costs, your schedule for buying vehicles, your buildings and what needs to be done with the buildings, and doing a long-term plan, capital plan, and then figuring what you can spend each year to go towards capital, and that has to be rolled into the budget as well.
Thank you.
Bill, based on your review of Abington's charter, and I assume that you've reviewed it, what do you believe are the fundamental roles of the Board of Selectmen and the town manager?
The Board of Selectmen, setting policy, overseeing the manager and setting policies for the town. The town manager has more authority as far as hiring, firing, and overseeing the department, developing policies for the select board, and managing the operations of the town.
Thank you. Mike?
Bill, an important element for effective team working is for the team to share a vision and goals. How do you try to achieve this with teams that you lead?
Well, there's two different views of that. One is working with the select board and the community, and I think it's important that the select board agrees on the vision that the town, determining what the town's vision is, and having the board bought into that vision and getting the public bought into it as well. So in that side, and you have your select board, and then you have your group of your founding fathers, so to speak, the people in town who have been involved in government, and you need to have them bought into the vision as well. And the more consensus you can get, the more you can move the vision forward. From the department side, my two key things with my department heads are ethics and leadership. I had the benefit of spending 3 weeks at the Kennedy School. They do a senior executive program for local and state officials. And that was a focus, learning how government works. And it's interesting, because I've been in government for a long time, and you spend 3 weeks in there, and you come out and say, oh, now I get it. You know, we've created a system where there's this crazy interaction to try to get from point A to point B, but it's good because people are involved. And the idea is for it to be a democratic process and people involved in the decision-making. And then leadership and teaching staff to be willing to stand out there and stand on the edge and make decisions that are difficult but need to be made to do things right. So my goal is and as a credentialed manager, one of my directives in improving myself as a manager is to be good in ethics and to be good in metrics. So learning how to develop the numbers to make better decisions, and develop ethical skills, better develop ethical skills, and that's something I bring to my staff.
Thank you. Kevin?
Pardon me, following up on my initial question, kind of getting from my own edification, the form of government in Rhode Island and what your experiences were there, and kind of dovetailing into Andy's first question in terms of looking at Abington's town charter, the role of the town manager and the selectmen. Can you give me your philosophy in terms of keeping the board informed? And I guess the question becomes that it's undisputable the town manager has a lot of authority. But,
Right.
sometimes when actions are taking, the board hears about them on the street versus the town manager. I guess,
Correct.
Can you give me, based on your experience, where you've been and what your philosophy is moving forward?
And I have to say, my first philosophy is I serve at the pleasure of the board. And that's the approach I take. You know, I'm not someone will run off and try and do something without having the board bought in. You know, whether I'm an administrator or an executive secretary or a town manager, I think it doesn't matter. That you serve at the pleasure of the board, and to operate well, you have to work as a team. Can you repeat the second part?
Sure, yeah. In terms of your philosophy, so in other words, if realizing that the Board of Selectmen in Abington, based on the charter, is more policymaking, licensing, however, the day-to-day operations is entrusted to the manager. And the manager, I'll give you for instance, will be involved in a personnel, issue that in a community, a small community, and you've obviously worked in them, you know how the rumor mills get going.
Right. And the communication, so it's the communication piece of it.
Exactly.
I've worked with Constant Contact, which is it's a blast email where you send emails out. And actually, I've used that and the E911 phone system, and it's particularly in emergency situations, so that the message gets out there to the community. But I think first the message has to get out to the select board. This is what's happening, this is what we're doing. We had flooding, we bring the select board in, we sit down, these are the issues, we need to make some decisions, let's talk about how we're gonna go forward, this is how we're gonna, with the EMA director, the police chief, the department heads, this is the issues, let's talk about a solution and how we're gonna move forward, and the board knows right up front where we're going. I think it's important to do weekly reports to the emails to the board to let them know what's happened in the week and where things are going, and then distribute that publicly. But the board needs to know first.
Thanks.
That's where you don't get blindsided. I heard about you're in the market, I heard about this, and you say, huh?
Ken?
I'm sure you've got, you're overdosing on Abington lately, you're learning a lot about the town, you visited. What do you think your biggest challenge when you come to Abington will be as your town manager, and how will you address it?
Well, the budget is always the challenging part, and you get the budget together, you get it out there, you get it approved, and then you make sure that you stick to the budget. Issues I find with the budget typically run into overtime with departments that, snow removal, public safety, you have to have minimum staffing, and trying to control that. Other than that, from my mind, it's trying to grow development in the town in terms of build the economy in the town. And it works best for me when that's the vision for the town, that we want to improve the economy, and let's work together as a team to do that. I see you need to have a sustainable, there are terms out there, an economy that can flex with the way things are going and still be stable. And to me, that's, once you have the budget in place, the rest of the year is spent doing that.
Bill, this question is from Miss Ryerson. She's the vice chair of our SAGE committee, our green group, and her question is, Abington is working to become a green community. Describe any areas of your past experience that would help us accomplish this goal. And in general, what are your thoughts and suggestions on alternative energy for Abington as a whole and for the town buildings in particular?
I became an environmental planner, and in doing that, my graduate school at Clark was environmental studies and economics. So the two of them work together, where you have to, you try to be as green as you can in the most cost-effective way that you can do that. And in my mind, the ideal way to do that is looking at brownfields, the landfill, buildings that have been marginalized by contamination, and trying to bring in alternative energy at those areas. The next thing is building energy efficiency and looking at all the municipal buildings and make sure they're energy efficient if the option is there, cost-effective, to do some sort of solar addition to a building, to go that way. I've been involved in Charlestown, if you saw my name on the internet, there's a lot of issues involved with a solar project, a wind project rather, in Charlestown, where I came in with a council of 5 members who were pro-wind, and they wanted towers built on some private land, they wanted some wind generators built on some public land, and the large part of the community railed against that, and we got a council that came in that ran on an anti-wind platform. So it goes back to building consensus and making sure the public is aware of what you want to do, and trying to, I mean, I'm pro-alternative energy. I think where you can use it, you should be using it. The problem we have in Rhode Island is Rhode Island doesn't produce any energy, so they just pay for it to come in, and as long as they can afford it, it's not a problem. I would rather live next to a field full of solar panels than a coal electric plant. You know, there are, but if it's either the solar panels or nothing, then I'd probably just rather live next to a lot of people. I'd rather just have the field there than a tower with a wind generator on it. So when you have options, when you need to make a decision, my feeling is you go green, even if it costs a little bit more to bring it to the cost that you need to get to.
Let me just follow up, because that was interesting. What was your takeaway? What was the lessons learned where it sounded like this plan caused some controversy? What would you have done differently, if anything?
Going in, my feeling was the town was very supportive of green technology. And what I learned was they're more conservation-minded and land protection-minded than green technology. And it really depends. It depends on where you are, and it's building consensus. One of my colleagues in East Providence was trying to do some labor corrections, and he had a council behind him, and they all moved to make these corrections with their public safety. And the next election came, and again, in Rhode Island, every 2 years, everyone runs for office, and the whole group that was promoting this change in public safety all got voted out of office. New labor group came in, and the first thing he did was remove the manager, because he was moving this policy forward for. I mean, sometimes you follow the goals of your board, and the public doesn't like it, and the board goes and you go with them. I mean, the ideal is to build a consensus and make sure you have it as you move along.
Thank you.
Bill, how do you typically deal with an employee when his or her results are unacceptable? And can you give us an example of when that has happened?
One thing I've done in both Charlestown and Hopkinton was to set up a performance evaluation system. So I came in and I sit down with my staff and say, what are your goals for the year? And we sit down and set up goals and objectives for the year. 6 months into the year, we sit down and review to see how things are going. And we have a formal review in 6 months, but in the interim, it's keeping track of how things are going. And so my goal is to have staff that have goals and objectives, and they're meeting them. We set some standards. They'll say, this is what I'd like to do, and often it's, well, this is what I'd like to see you do as well. Let's roll this into here and see how we do during the year. My experience has been that you try and make that happen, and you do, unless things really get bad, you don't get into the, discipline is hard. I mean, I've implemented some very light discipline matters that were grieved and retracted, and I mean, it's difficult. So it's more a carrot approach than a stick. Most communities don't have merit. You know, the more you can get towards merit increases, the better off you are. I mean, and that would be a goal to do that, again, based on metrics, but it's difficult to do in government.
Well, we're coming to the end. I don't know, does anybody else have any further questions? Or we've each had a round of 3, so at this point, I'm going to offer you the opportunity to ask any questions of us, if you have any. We'll do our best to answer, not guaranteeing.
I would like to thank you for the opportunity we had to talk with people on Thursday night. It was very beneficial to me.
I think that was a good thing.
It was good, and even though the weather was tough and it was a white knuckle ride home, it was, I know what a commute is like on a bad day home.
Something you learned.
But it was very good, and I learned a lot about where the town is going and what the town's looking for. Again, I think there's a lot that I can bring to the town, having the planning and the legal background. Budgeting, I think everyone that you talk with has good budgeting experience and skills, and it's something you develop. In all my positions from my 30s on, I've worked my way up into administrator. When I worked at Mass DEP, I came in as a planner and left as an administrator. The Division of Solid Waste, I was the deputy director doing their budgeting and overseeing operations. As the director of the GIS department, same thing. I was doing budgeting and overseeing staff and operations, and that's what I've done at the municipal level. So I have those skills, and as well, I have the planning, economic development, and legal skills, which I think is an asset for the town, especially in towns that you don't have a planner in place, and you rely on a consultant to come in and look at development projects. You need to have a vision and try and move things forward. Things are going to happen, and unless you're planning on what you want to see happen, you settle for what happens in town. And I think it's important to be able to have a team that sits down and say, where do we want to go? Let's look at our comprehensive plan. Is it still the way it is? Our community plan, what do we have to change, and try and move things down that path. Create your land use regulations to match that. I mean, those are things I've done. Zoning, planning, trying to develop ordinances and regulations that fit what you want to see in the town. And I think that's what creates quality of life.
I have just one more question. Is there anything that you've seen that would concern you as far as accepting the job if it were offered to you? Do you have any concerns that you see?
I really don't. I mean, I like the community, what I've seen. I think there are opportunities. I think there are a lot of good things already in place, and there are opportunities. Just in terms of my living in Rhode Island, as I mentioned, my children are in their late teens. My son's off to college next year. My daughter has 2 years of high school left. Our plan is to get her through high school, and she'll be off to college. My goal is to have a place to be up here, whether it's an efficiency apartment or a room that I can get at a reasonable rate. So when there's a meeting at night, or I'm needed here, I'm here. I mean, I'm a hands-on guy. You look in the back of my car, and I have my yellow Public Works jacket in there, and I'm ready to put it on. I'm the public information officers in the towns I've been in, and I roll up my sleeves and make sure things are being done. And I intend to be in a town that I'm working in. With Hurricane Sandy, I didn't have a town to work in, and it was, what do I do? Because it's something I want to do. It's something I look forward to doing. So just so you know, I will be here for the town.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very well done.
Want to. Right.
So our next candidate is Richard LaFond. And Rick, I'm just going to explain the procedure here. First, I'm going to introduce the members, and I think you've met everybody the other night, or you know everybody. Mike Franey, Kevin Donovan, Ken Coyle, and Tom Dion, and I'm Andy Burbine. We're going to ask you for a brief opening statement if you want to give one, and then we'll give you a round of questions, or rounds of questions, I should say. And then we'll give you the opportunity to ask us questions, or if you have any, and then we'll give you a closing statement. It's our intention to discuss this on Monday night at our regular meeting, as far as the appointment goes. And if we do something on Monday night, then we'll contact you either way as to what the results were. Okay. So if you floor is yours.
Sure. Well, briefly, as you know my name, you have a good idea of my resume. I've been in local government management for about over 20 years now, which is kind of a scary thought. Probably recall I did a stint in Abington back in the 1990s. I've been in Carver for approximately the last 17 years, holding a position very similar to the position that you have here in Abington. I'm very well-rounded, have to be based upon the positions I've held. I would consider myself rather expert in municipal finance, personnel administration, procurement. I'm not perfect, but rather expert in those things. I know that's a good deal of obviously what you would expect from your town manager position here. I have not spent the last 17 years interviewing for jobs. I would like to suggest that the reason I'm here is because it's Abington, not because I need a job or not because I just happen to be looking all the time for a job. I enjoyed my time here many years ago, and to the extent that there might be a professional opportunity, I thought it would be nice to explore. And so far, I have to say, it's really been a fun process, and I enjoyed the other evening at the senior center, seeing some people I hadn't seen in many years, and they still make fun of me, and I still make fun of them. So it was as if the years just vanished. So it was a lot of fun. So I've enjoyed myself, and like I said, I'm not here because I'm constantly looking or need a job. I'm here because of my, I guess, prior relationships and my attitude about Abington. So.
Great, thank you. Mike?
Yes.
Question?
Rick, what was the most controversial issue you faced as a town manager? How did you handle it, and what was the outcome?
I think, well, there's obviously been over 20 years or so, there's been a number of controversial issues. I think one of the, I guess, one I would bring forward would be we had a huge issue in Carver with regard to the establishment of a new water system. There hadn't been a startup water system in this state in almost 100 years, from what we've been told by DEP. A lot of rancor in the community about whether or not it was an investment we should make, whether it would pay for itself. It was also tied up with a lot of different funding options, Community Preservation Act, grants, et cetera, and trying to help bring those different forces together. Carver's an interesting community and has, like most communities, has a lot of philosophical bridges that need to be handled from time to time between people who have different philosophies about government, what government should do, shouldn't do. So helping to forge a compromise between people who are anti-conservation, people who aren't concerned about, we'll say, business, people more concerned about community rural character, to try to forge a kind of compromise that would accommodate everybody's needs with regard to CPA, purchasing open space, and establishing a water system. This all came together in an area, North Carver, called the Cole property. So it took several years, and I don't want to say arm twisting, but there was it takes a lot of effort to get people on board when they're coming from different philosophical backgrounds. Sometimes the facts aren't the issue. It's people getting beyond their philosophical attitudes about what we should and shouldn't be doing in government. So that was, and I bring that one up because it had so many different elements to it. I mean, like every community, there is maybe a particular issue, whether it's a personnel issue or a legal issue, but that was just so multifaceted, and it spanned several years, but we did get it done, and we hope sometime in the next generation it'll actually pay for itself. But it is working. So.
Thank you.
Kevin?
Welcome, Rick. In order to be consistent in my past questioning of the other candidate and for future candidates, just so Mr. Franny won't have heartburn that I'm straying off course.
It's always
Could you, looking at obviously the charter in Abington, the form of government in Abington, and the Town Administrator Act in form of government in Carver, could you give us your experience based on not only the title, I know in Massachusetts, the title of town administrator and town manager is interchangeable in terms of their duties. Even down the Cape, executive secretary sometimes has town manager authority. Could you tell us what your duties are in Carver and how it relates to the town of Abington, as well as the form of government?
Sure. And I would agree that titles really don't mean much anymore. When I was looking at this particular job, obviously my goal is not professionally to go backwards in terms of, authority and a potential influence in a community. And there are some town manager charters that would actually do that. My role in Carver is actually a very strong administrative position. I have almost godlike appointing authority, some would say. I actually don't appoint police and fire chiefs and the police and fire personnel. Administrative staff and dispatchers, yes, but we do have the strong chief laws down in Carver. Beyond that, I actually have the budget authority and personnel director. I am the chief procurement officer. I think very similar to this town manager charter. I also, interestingly enough, appoint department heads and employees of other elected bodies, planning, library, et cetera. So I think the responsibilities in that regard are very, very similar. One of the interesting parts about it, I actually appoint the finance committee, if you can, perhaps not, I shouldn't say any more about that, but one of the interesting things about it, though, is under the requirements in Carver, I am required to consult with the multi-member bodies that for whom individuals would be working if they're working for elected authorities. So there's a lot of interaction and a lot of consultation, a lot of screening committees to do things, but it works. It works pretty well. I mean, I have authority, but on the other hand, it's pretty lonely when you're exercising that alone. It's very lonely because I'm not going to tell you I've never made a mistake. And it's nice to be having made a mistake with other people than having done that alone. So, but I would suggest that with very few issues, appointing issues, the charter, the requirement, the charter versus the legislation in Carver are very similar. I've actually speculated that there's somebody in a cave in Tibet who actually writes all this language for every city and town in Massachusetts, and they just pick and choose what they want because most of these actually read very similarly when you get to a certain level.
If I could have, just to follow up, in terms of, again, does Carver have an open town meeting, representative town meeting? And relating, when you mention in terms of working with multi-member boards or elected officials, specifically the school department, if you could elaborate a little bit of your working cooperation with those entities.
Carver does have an open town meeting form of government, and you all know what that means. So, with regard specifically to the school department, I mean, I would actually suggest that we have formed a model relationship in Carver with our school department. I've had 3 superintendents in the town since I've been there. I've had 3 business managers, 4 actually, one of them's a repeat, the gentleman who's in now. And the school business manager / assistant superintendent is really probably, along with my town accountant, probably the most key member of what I would consider the management team in town, financially and otherwise. Formally and informally, we should, the sharing of resources, whether they be IT resources or buildings and grounds resources, all flow through, the business manager, and the development of the budget right from the beginning is a cooperative process with the school administration, and if my experience before Carver was very clear that if you don't have a good working relationship with your school administration, you are going to fail at some point. And I don't take full credit for that. In Carver, they've always had a strong relationship, and I think it resulted to a great extent from the good feeling that came from the disbanding of the regional school district, the Plymouth Carver district, in the late 80s. So there was a really strong pro-school, pro-community environment there when I got there in the mid-'90s still, and the school committee members and the Board of Selectmen, some of them had gone back and forth from those different boards, so so it was kind of an institutional condition where the school and the non-school departments got along well, and I've been able to foster that, and I think help take that to a level that that I think it's a model. When my school administration tell me it's a model of cooperation between the school and the town, then I'm certainly not going to disagree with that.
Very good, thank you.
Ken?
My questions will sound familiar because they're basically some of the more, some of the best questions from the town search committee. Abington has a newly formed union which consists of some of our department heads, such as the assistant town manager. How might this situation affect your ability to manage effectively?
I don't think that the forming of a union itself is an issue in terms of governing effectiveness. I think, what that contract looks like could be an issue. They were actually in the process of early stages of forming a supervisory union in Carver, and those are for issues completely unrelated to who's sitting in the town administrator chair down there. I do think, though, that the position of assistant town manager is a little bit of a complex problem. It's my goal, and I will successfully ensure that my assistant in Carver, although not at the level of the assistant position in Abington, is not in that group. There's other positions, for instance, like my town accountant, who I have considered, although it's in transition right now, a key member of my management team financially in terms of advice regarding personnel and such, that I think there would really be at some point a compromise there. And I don't think it's healthy to have key management people in a collective bargaining unit. Again, I don't know the history here with regard to that. I don't know what remedy may be available, through negotiation or whatever. But I would certainly, at least with regard to the assistant position, at least explore if there were some other options rather than that. But like I said, without knowing the history, it would be inappropriate for me to really provide an opinion on the value of that in Abington. But there are some areas, particular key points, as you point out, Mr. Coyle, like with the assistant town manager, that just seem a little counterintuitive.
Thank you.
Tom?
Rick, could you tell us about a conflict you may have had with a superior or board member, and, specifically what happened, how did it get resolved, and what would you have done differently next time, if anything?
Boy, this would have been a nice one to have in advance. That's a good one. With a superior, like a member of the Board of Selectmen specifically, you're suggesting, Mr.
Well,
Dion?
yeah, superior, there's some sort of a issue that you didn't see eye to eye, and there was some sort of conflict, and, how did you go about resolving it? What happened?
Well, I would maybe provide maybe two examples. One, when I started in Carver, I had the privilege of working with a gentleman who'd been on the board for about 40 years at that time. So it was a major change in culture for that particular selectman, and we had a lot of differences of opinion about how certain things should be handled. What I discovered with this particular gentleman, who spent most of his waking hours at Town Hall, wasn't ultimately that we had major differences. It's just that he wanted to be more involved in the decision-making like he had been for several generations. That was more of a personality issue, and I don't know how you'd term that, a psychological issue rather than a factual type issue. Currently I've got a situation, as some of you may know, where I have a number of employees of the town who are on the Board of Selectmen. So there are several conflicts of interest from time to time, and I've had an issue with my current chairman, who's a police sergeant, and over my last contract that I had negotiated. And ultimately, there was, I'm not sure that was, this is a success story that I'm about to tell you, but there comes a time when you have to just agree to disagree, stand your ground, and do what you have to do. And ultimately, the particular gentleman ended up getting himself in some hot water with the Ethics Commission. And, I can only advise to the best that I can advise. It's, I don't consider myself an ethics attorney, or an attorney of any kind for that matter. But when the issues get beyond legal and they become personal, sometimes it's hard to overcome those. So I don't like to have, I'm not oriented towards conflict, but there's times when you have to stand your ground and let the chips fall, do your best to advise people. Most of what we accomplish in local government is through compromise, and through, conciliation, but there are times when you just have to stand up for what you think is right, and sometimes that puts you on the wrong end of a political equation, but we have professional obligations, we have obligations to our employees and our families, and sometimes those situations don't end well. I'm not saying that's the way it is in Carver right now. I think we've overcome those issues, but it does create, they are problematic. So, given a little more time, I could have come up with some real good ones,
Thank you,
I'm
that was
sure.
good.
But
You went into this, Rick, a little bit on your opening, but what about specifically about Abington attracted you to apply for this position?
Well, I was here for a couple of years in the 90s, and one of the things that I always liked about Abington, and I used to joke back then that I was there for about 2.5 years, and it seemed like 20, because it's an intense community. There's tremendous community spirit. And I know that, everywhere you go, there's going to be trouble finding somebody to serve on a board or a committee from time to time, but my recollections of Abington were that it's a very high-spirit community, a lot of community involvement, a lot of passion in the community, and apathy is not as much of a problem as it is in other places. It's a diverse community. I just enjoyed my experience here, and I enjoyed the people I worked with here. And so I think there's a familiarity to it, a comfort level, a little bit of a affection from the old days, I guess you'd say. And I haven't been looking around, as you know, for jobs in any significant way. But I just thought this would be perhaps an interesting opportunity for me to deal with some of the people I used to deal with. I've been in Carver 17 years. I'm not suggesting that I'm stale professionally, but, there does come a time, mid-career, I've got about 16, 17 years left before I'm an overpriced consultant working, interim gigs in this business. So, I've got, I want to be, at a deeper level, and this is probably more than you want to hear, Mr. Burbine, but,
Probably not,
but
actually.
I have 2 kids. They're in high school. I want to be an example for them, as trying to better myself, try to, professionally and otherwise. I don't want to be complacent in my life, because I don't want them to be complacent themselves. And fortunately, their mom makes sure they're not very complacent. And in fact, if you don't hire me, you might want to bring her in. She'll run the place, trust me. So that's a combination of, why Abington I always found was a really great community to be in, great people. And it's good for me. It's time, it's time to start maybe finding a different place to ply my trade. Maybe Abington will work out. If it doesn't, that doesn't mean I'm out there looking around again. It just seemed like maybe it would be a good time and a good fit. It's a new form of government from the last time I was here. So then you got rid of the old church.
Was that one of the attractions, the fact that it's a new form of government?
Yeah, I would not be applying for this job if it was the former form of government. There would be a professional, as going to the question of Mr. Donovan earlier in the night, it would be, I guess, a professional regression on my part. And I would only do that for a whole lot more money than most people can spend, so.
Very good, thank you. Mike?
What has been the most significant achievement in your career so far, and what makes it significant?
Keeping a job for 17 years, I think would be a. You know, I kind of said that tongue-in-cheek, but perhaps I shouldn't have. You know, I guess, boy, the last gentleman said he got beat up real good, and now I can see what he's talking about. I guess, you can, it's hard to go to sleep in this business. You can't go to sleep and be somewhere for 17 years and retire or whatever. I think, an achievement is really, I've been successful in one location for a long time. And I think the reason for that is because, I'm not afraid of change. I'm not afraid to change the way I have to do business. As an example, to count the number of board members I've worked with in Carver would take me a little while, but I've worked with numerous board members. Collectively and individually, they all have different needs, particularly with regard to communication. I've gone through phases where I'm doing regular written updates, sometimes, periods where that's not necessary, phases where I meet with people on an individual basis on a, regular schedule, whatever it is that makes the board feel like they're involved as much as they want to be. I've dealt effectively with collective bargaining units for a long time, with employees for a long time, and I think you have to be somewhere for a significant period of time to accomplish something significant. And you can't do that if you're not creating, I like to say you have to create effective relationships. You don't have to be brilliant, fortunately for me, but you do have to be able to have effective relationships with people, and even people who you disagree with, people who have completely different philosophical ideas about government or the town in general. So, I am in pretty good standing in Carver right now. I'm not on the outs, so to speak, okay? But I think maybe maintaining a very strong position, good relationships over a long period of time, I guess that is an achievement in this business anyway. I just can't believe 17 years have gone by. That's the part that's bothering me. So.
Thank you.
Kevin?
If I could, focusing on your experience in Carver, and we've had the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, and I don't think anybody will dispute that, and it's severely taxed local government. Can you give me examples of how you were able to deal with that effectively, in the Carver administration?
Well, I guess what I might call effective, some people might not, but I think it goes back to a little bit of the last question that Mr. Franny asked, and I'm glad that I was in Carver for a few years before this downturn occurred, because it actually, had I known it was coming, I'd be in a different business, but at the time, it allowed me time during some reasonably good economic times to forge good, strong relationships, particularly with collective bargaining units and other elected officials and the school officials in particular. There's no magic bullet here. I mean, one of the biggest things you have to do is substantially curb the growth of government. And I think we've done that through what most communities have done: attrition, sharing of resources, sharing of staff among multiple departments. I would consider the fact that we've had extremely modest collective bargaining increases over the last 10 years or so. But you don't do that by sitting in a room with people and throwing rocks at each other. You do that by having union leadership believe you when you tell them and show them the situation. It's funny how we all tend to make the same decisions when confronted with the same facts that are credible. And we've also taken the opportunities to, again, combine, most recently, for instance, I had a vacancy on my council on aging, and I've now have my library director doing both double duty. I've saved about 70, 80,000 in that department in the last few years, and I'd like to think they're getting better service than they were even. So, so it's really, it's not like there's any one thing you do. It's really a combination of coming from multiple directions. Working with the school department, you probably saw from maybe my cover letter several years ago, we formed our own health group. We broke away from what was then the old county system. That would not have been possible without the help of my the school administration. In fact, there's only been 2 chair people of the group in 8 years, me and now my assistant superintendent of schools. So it's definitely a Carver-run system. But trying to get a handle, if you're not doing everything you can to address fixed costs, then you're not doing enough. And you can't do that without the cooperation of your major departments and your unions. And so I'm sorry if that's a little bit rambling, Mr. Donovan, but there's really no one thing. It's a multi-prong, ongoing, day-to-day effort.
Thank you.
Ken?
Some residents in Abington are very concerned about maintaining property values. Others are concerned about limiting tax bill increases, and still others would like to see an immediate need for greater investment in our education system. In many ways, these issues are all interrelated. As a town manager, how would you attempt to address these issues, and how would you prioritize the needs of the community?
I wouldn't. I would let the community try and do that. I think there are some methods that are tried and fairly proven in terms of strategic planning exercises. Master planning is more related to land use and other, but master planning is huge. What kind of community do you want to live in? Strategic planning, where you get the community involved and the advocates of different segments of the community, can be very helpful in getting people to understand each other's concerns. Sometimes, there's no way one individual or one board even can really effectively deal with and come up with some grand, design. And there's probably no perfect way to do it at all, but there are ways to get the community involved in putting together what they consider to be a vision of their future. And I think if for instance, if people who are seeking more investment, have a better idea of the concerns of people on fixed incomes and how that can affect them, and vice versa, and those are obviously just 2 of the segments you mentioned, it does create a little bit of a sympathetic overlap, and people tend to, they don't change their thoughts, but they can modify them. People's attitudes and expectations can become a little more modest. But you do, I think, to the extent that you make an effort to get people in the same room and participate in that type of a process, it goes a long way. Again, there's no perfect way to do it. In 200 years, there'll be the same types of questions and concerns, but hopefully in one little period of time, you can help keep the community moving in a direction that they tell you they want to go in.
Thank you very much.
Tom?
Rick, would you describe your budgeting experience and methodologies? In particular, I'm interested in your approach to budget creation and budget management in a municipal environment of constrained revenue growth and costly unfunded mandates.
For the most part, in my history, it's been, obviously it's a very much a revenue-driven process, unlike what I'm told of the old Prop 2.5 days, where it was an expenditure-driven process. So, the most important thing for me is, over the course of the year, to be meeting with what I consider my financial team, the accounting, the treasurer, assessor, and my school business manager, to make sure that we're on track in terms of our prior projections, and then to forge a early enough in the process to determine what we believe the revenue outlook's going to be for the following year. In Carver, we've had what I called an apportionment formula with the school department. So after we eliminate some particular fixed costs, we divvy the budget up, the school and the non-school budgets. So we're not fighting, teachers versus animal control, because there'd be no animal control. I mean, from a priority basis, those are unwinnable types of debates. So early in the process, it's very much a revenue-driven, getting a revenue consensus. From there, the process, breaks down more into your individual budgeting, department by department, budgets. My goal is really to keep my department heads involved all the time in terms of what those financial projections look like, and to keep them talking, regular department head meetings and focus groups with various, whether it's my land use people or public safety people, so that they're always aware of the financial situation and what the upcoming budget season looks like. Like I said, I don't have the magical operational guide as to how you make things work in a tight fiscal environment. These people that are on the front lines of making tight budgets work are very critical in helping us put together those budget plans. So usually, once we go from this heavily revenue-driven piece of the process, then we get into our individual departmental budgeting. And the revenue process has given you specific goals you have to work within, whether it's 1.46% increase like we're looking at this year in Carver, or 3%, or we need to talk about what a 2% reduction is going to look like. It's interesting because it's the finance committee is not is kind of more on the tail end of the process in Carver. Where we put together, I put together a what I consider a balanced budget presented to the selectmen and the finance committee, and from there, the finance committee really gets involved more in the nitty-gritty from a process standpoint. So I like to think I make their jobs easy by giving it to them up front. Obviously, that all culminates at a town meeting, but one of the things that makes it work, and I'll go, and I don't want to beat this to death, is that the biggest piece of the pie, the school department, is really dealt with right up front from the revenue perspective, and we don't micromanage. You can't do it legally anyway. The school budget, but it also it provides good faith throughout the process that we're not trying to. The school department in Carver has never gone to town meeting to get another dime that wasn't in the revenue projection from their apportionment. And it's never worked the other way either. So from a process standpoint, that's basically the way it works.
I just want to pick up on one thing you said. So you present to your board and the finance committee a balanced budget?
Yes.
Really?
Well, I consider it a balanced budget. But yes, it's a balanced budget.
Thank you.
I could do an unbalanced budget if you'd like. No, but I know it's one of the things that we do in Carver also is we changed many years ago. We changed our town meeting date to this is going to be in early June, so it's very hard to do a budget in March and April and feel confident about it. I mean, it's hard to do it any time in Massachusetts and feel confident about it, but having a later town meeting does provide me I think a better opportunity to do that than if we were doing it in March.
Thank you.
Rick, based on your review of Abington's town charter, and you said you had reviewed it, what do you believe are the fundamental roles of the town manager, the board of selectmen, and the finance committee?
Well, obviously, I focused on the town manager primarily, but the town manager obviously is, to a great extent, a big part of the executive branch of government. One of the key things that any executive does is it tries to appoint good people, deal with personnel, procurement, the whole breadth of administration. I think my understanding is that the role of the Board of Selectmen is to be a policy-making board, to interact with the town manager over those policies, to develop and put into place policies you feel are important for the town. whether they be personnel or finance or whatever. And the finance committee role seems to be set out, obviously as one that's more involved in the budget process than what I've been used to in Carver. That's because I appoint them in Carver. That's funny how that works, huh? And it seems to me that the town manager is dealing more with the finance committee during the budget development process than the board of selectmen, from what I seem to be able to get from what I've read. In that the finance committee also will work with the town manager to investigate areas of the budget or administration they feel should be reviewed for, whether they be financial opportunities or irregularities or whatever the case might be. So, but that's what I get from the formal. But what I would say is it's not the formal, but it's a lot of the how you actually do that is the important thing, not what is written. Like I said, just because the town manager might appoint, a particular position doesn't mean that you don't want the people who maybe develop policy, whether it's the finance committee or selectmen, involved in assisting with the executive duties of the town manager. Now, it may very well be that nobody really cares or wants to participate in that, but I think to the extent that you kind of open up the shade on what's happening in the management and administrative side of things, I think that facilitates good relations, and I think it facilitates better policy making by people too. So, if there was let's just say for the sake of argument, the Board of Selectmen had a particular, fiscal policy with regard to, wage and classification, and a member of the board is involved in a particular search process, and you find out that, within our policies, we can't meet the town's needs, that's a healthy situation. So, I'm not back here on my knees trying to explain to you why something doesn't work. You can see it. That may never happen, but just as an example, I think to the extent that you can, within reason, try to build these bridges is a good thing. It actually makes all of our lives easier in the long run.
Thank you. Mike?
You probably alluded to some of these points, but I wanted to ask the same question to the candidates anyways. An important element for effective teamwork is for the team to share a vision and goals. How do you try to achieve this with teams that you lead?
Listen to them. That's the easiest way. I mentioned earlier that I have regular department head meetings, and we have try to have little focus meetings. Like I mentioned, we've got a great land use operation in Carver. As far as I'm concerned, we've got a financial team. So I think having regular discussions with these people and having these people have regular discussions with each other, which is sometimes more challenging than it would sound, that's a big part of the process. And again, it's not a management-heavy part of it. One of the things that I realize is that probably much more than I did when I was in Abington many, many years ago is that I probably don't know as much as I oftentimes think I do. And that's a sobering thought sometimes. But the people who are managing day-to-day departments, the older I get, the more impressed I am with how much, people have to know, how much they have to deal with. Massachusetts is only getting more difficult in terms of regulations and procedures, and so you really have to have your staff is, if they're doing their jobs, they can be pretty impressive in what they can bring to the table. So, I think in terms of getting people on board with goals. I think a lot of it has to do with getting them on board with each other, not just me. Obviously, there's the personnel review process where we go through and establish individual goals and things like that. But I think you meant more like organizational goals. And it's amazing that if you ask them, the people on the front lines and the managers, they know what ought to be done. And I think if you can combine that with, some good policy and good planning, whether it's strategic planning, you can start to put those goals together. It's not easy to do, and I know communities spend an awful lot of money, you know, for example, maybe like a Brookline, okay, which Abington has often been compared to Brookline, I think, financially. You know, there are these communities that have the ability to do some tremendous planning, and, you know, you'll have, you know, stacks of paper on goal setting and planning, and that's all great stuff. But most communities don't have the ability to have that type of formality to it. You know, you can't spend $50,000 in consultants to do certain things. So to me, a lot of it is really, it's listening. It's listening, it's putting people together who have stakes and issues, putting people together who have a commonality in terms of their function for the community, and listen to them.
Thank you.
Kevin?
If I could, you've had the opportunity, obviously, in your research to look at the town charter, and realizing that the town manager has broad administrative authority, the Board of Selectmen, as has been pointed out, is more policymaking and licensing. However, in the issues that come up on a day-to-day basis, or just even if it's a personnel issue, what's your I guess, policy or your thought process in terms of keeping the board in the loop, so that if we're out on the street and all of a sudden we're down to the barber shop and somebody says something and boom, you're like, huh?
Yeah, sounds like you've been in that situation once or twice. My general attitude, and for the most part, I think I do it reasonably well anyway, is I never want the selectmen to hear or read something unless they've at least heard it from me first, or at least me, you know. For instance, you know, my selectmen aren't going to read that I'm interviewing in Abington. They're going to hear it from me. You know, if there's an issue that I feel may explode, or maybe even something that may be pertinent to just one selectman, you know, that, you know, I want them to know. I want them to hear from me, because I never want selectmen to be embarrassed. I never want. You know, I walk around enough in my life saying, boy, geez, I don't know that. So I know what it's like when you don't feel like you've been properly informed. Now, that can't be done universally, because you never know what's going to be out there before you even hear it. And sometimes you can maybe miscalculate what may be important to a member of a board or the board as a whole. But you can make a good faith effort. You can make a good faith effort, and certainly to the extent that members of boards aren't bashful about letting you know when you've done that well or poorly, that always helps too. So,
Very good, thank you.
Ken?
You're probably up to here with Abington, but you visiting the community, reading up on it, and what you've known about it in the past, maybe they've changed, but what do you consider is the biggest challenge you will face if you are selected as Abington's town manager, and how will you address it?
well, a lot of the, you know, from the search committee process, from some of the discussions we had the other night, the senior center, and from the lines of questioning today, you know, it sounds to me like some of the issues, biggest, maybe one of the largest issues in Abington is this idea of communication and relationships between boards, perhaps. And I may be I may be putting two and two together and getting 22, but that's what seems to me what a priority might be. Now, keep in mind, every city and town in Massachusetts, if not in the whole United States, is dealing with budgetary problems. So making making organizations run in tough fiscal times, that's not unique to Abington, obviously. So that's a challenge. That's going to be a challenge. That's the nature of the beast. But the sense I get, discussing with some of the school committee members the other evening, is that it seems like there can be a little bit of a more trust between some of the players in town, a little less maybe suspicion about what people's intentions and roles are, and again, I feel a little bit. I don't want to presumptuous in answering that, because none of us are going to walk into town and tell you what your problem is and how we're going to fix your problem. I think I'm not devoid of confidence, Mr. Coyle, but, I think that would be a little bit arrogant for me to tell you that. So I'm just trying to pick up what I can from the process you've run. And it sounds to me like there's a real opportunity here to try to build some relationships that can maybe be a little more effective.
Thank you.
Rick, this question is from Ms. Ryerson. She's the vice chair of our SAGE committee, our green group. And her question is, Abington is working to become a green community. Describe any areas of your past experience that would help us accomplish this goal. And in general, what are your thoughts and suggestions on alternative energy for Abington as a whole and for the town buildings in particular?
Well, 17 years in Carver makes you green. I don't know if that's good or bad, but although I've heard Abington considers itself rather green too, but I did wear the green tie. My wife wouldn't let me come to Abington without a green tie. So in Carver, we've been unsuccessful in passing the in getting the Green Communities Act adopted, only because it has broken down a couple times with discussions relating to the stretch code. There's a lot of concerns, I don't want to call it paranoia, about what the stretch code would do in terms of the costs to citizens, and, for home improvements, rehab, what it might do to the construction community, business community. So, we have gone to the extent of accepting the stretch code. Personally, I am a huge advocate of renewable energy. We have, in fact, if you drive down Route 44 in Carver, we've got only the second solar array on a public highway in the United States, and we're going to double that hopefully in the next year. I am a proponent of renewable energy. I am also have had the opportunity to work on those projects in Carver. I don't know in terms of I don't know the status of the municipal facilities in terms of how, what they're I don't know if you have contracts right now for purchasing renewable energy credits. I don't know any of that. That's a level of detail that's beyond me at this point. But I do believe that there's both an there's usually some economic incentive to do that over the long haul. I also believe that there's some maybe some moral and societal value to trying to further the goals of renewable energy in general. I think we're starting to get to the point where that's becoming practical and tangible, where you can actually do that. But there's always that issue of, well, investment. How much are you willing to, if you have to pay more to facilitate renewable energy down the road, that's a hard call for people. It's a difficult call. So, like I said, I like renewable energy. Carver is it's a farming community. It's very, very much, into the environment and conservation, and I've actually had a world of education on that down there, and grown to appreciate that. And I do think that there's things you can do in any community, but if you have to make an initial investment, it can get a little bit difficult. If you're going to retrofit buildings, et cetera. So.
Thank you.
That's.
Rick, how do you typically confront an employee when his or her results are unacceptable? And can you give us an example of when you have done so?
Well, yes. Unfortunately, we only deal with people in a small area of their life. People bring their issues, their problems, their dysfunction that may exist in their lives. They do bring it to work with them sometimes, and I am a type of person who I'm not. I don't want to call myself. I'm not a softie, but I'd like to deal with people with respect. I think you have to care about the people in your organization. And in Carver, I've been there long enough that there's virtually nobody there that I didn't appoint, and so I've known these people since they began working in Carver. And you have to treat people with sensitivity. My general attitude is, you know, we hired you for a reason, and we'd like you to be what we hired you for. We'd like you to be that person, and if we can help you do that, you know, we make good use of employee assistance program when we have to. You know, we do individual counseling with people. You know, we try to help people to the extent that they're having family issues by being a family-friendly community to work for. But there does come times, obviously, when the, you know, performance issues, they're just not working out. And, you know, unfortunately, when you get to a certain point, you've got to follow the traditional methods of dealing with employee problems through verbal, written warnings. And, you know, my attitude is people fire themselves. I don't fire them. They fire themselves. You know, I have one particular woman a couple years ago who was a staff person for a couple different departments, and she was having some personal issues. And over a period of time, that became unacceptable to us. She was a fabulous lady who just was having some tough times. And we made every attempt to try and rehabilitate her, but we couldn't do it. And unfortunately, I did have to, you know, terminate her employment. But it wasn't until we really made a real effort to try and salvage her employment, and quite frankly, you know, salvage, you know, in some ways her life. It's not my responsibility to, you know, to pick up people's lives for them outside town hall, but we certainly have to be compassionate to the extent that people are having difficult times. I have another employee who's been with the town probably for about a dozen years now, who had some difficult personal issues, essentially resigned by not showing up for work, and I was able to work with his department head to, you know, through medical intervention, and he's been a terrific employee for 12 years now, and he'll tell you today that we probably saved his life, you know. So, you know, personnel is tough. You know, there's no model for personnel. You do what you can to help people. My general attitude is you try to give back to people to the extent that they've given to the organization. So
our last question is actually whether or not you have any questions for the board. And also, are there anything that you've seen or heard that concerns you as far as if you were offered the position?
The answer to that second question is no. I think I'm familiar enough with the position. As I said, it's not an untypical position in terms of how it's structured. I've had a reasonably good chance to get to know some of the board members who I know from years ago, and some who I've had a chance to speak to a little bit the other night. So I guess I don't have any specific questions for you, Mr. Chairman. I think I just want to thank you for process you've run. It's been fun. It's kind of fun meeting some of my colleagues from out of state. We all know each other so well in Massachusetts, but it's kind of nice to meet some of these other gentlemen. And
well, if you don't have any questions, and if you want to, it's up to you if you want to give a closing statement or not. That's.
I'm amazed you still want me to give us closing statements. Well, okay. Well, then I will just again continue to say thank you for this has been fun to a great extent. It's nice to see some people I haven't seen in a long time, and I think you probably understand that my technical qualifications are more than suitable for the job. I hope that you feel that my personal qualities, characteristics, I'm a humble person, but I'm confident. I'm a functional person. I've got a very solid personal life. I've got a wonderful family, and I think I can bring stability. I think I can probably bring some longevity, and I think that perhaps if things hadn't been different 17 years ago, you would have watched my hair turn gray in front of you every week. So, but that's all I have to say.
Very good. Thank you, Rick. Very much.
Thank you.
Our third candidate is Grady Miller, And Grady, I'm just going to let you know what the process is. First, I'm going to introduce the members of the board. Again, my name's Andy Burbine. We have Mike Franey, Kevin Donovan, Ken Coyle, and Tom Dion. And the procedure is we're going to allow you time for a brief opening statement.
Okay.
And then we'll do some questions among the board. And then we'll ask you if you have any questions of us. And then at the end, we'll allow you for a closing statement. We will be discussing the appointment of the new town manager at Monday night's regular meeting. And if we do make a decision on Monday night, we will contact you either way.
Okay.
Okay, so before you
Super.
leave, if you can just give me a good number to reach you at, so we can get in touch with you.
Okay.
All right, so with that, you're on.
Well, I'd like to tell you I'm very pleased to be here today and very grateful for the search committee having gone through an extensive search and really ran a really good interview process. Let me just explain a little bit about myself for the benefit of the audience who might be watching this. My whole career, 27 years, has been dedicated to local government service. And my career goals all along, since the time I was in college, was to actually be in city management. I studied public administration in college, received a degree in public administration at San Diego State. I interned initially with local government and then realized this is definitely what I want to do, and worked in California for, I believe, about 4.5 years, and then moved on to Arizona for a great opportunity as the assistant to the city manager. The assistant to the city manager position is a city management trainee type program, so I was able to work under 3 different city managers who gave me a variety of different assignments and responsibilities. Basically, I was the human resources director for 5 years. I got my feet wet with major capital improvement projects. I was a project manager for a $13 million community theater, which was the major economic development thrust for our downtown, and was involved in that project for almost 10 years, about 9 years. And I stayed in I stayed in Peoria for almost 20 years. I had opportunities to leave, but I stayed there primarily because my daughter was in high school and we had an excellent high school system. And I did not want to disrupt her. My wife and I were fortunate because we had very stable family lives, and we thought it was very important for our daughter to have the same. So once she was in college, then I started looking at opportunities to pursue my career, my dream, and that was to be a city manager. So Narragansett presented itself as an opportunity. Narragansett's a town about the size of Abington. It's 16,000 people. It's on the coast. And it was really a great community. And I worked there for about 2.5 years. And in May of last year, the council and I basically came to terms to a separation agreement. So in any case, I'm here today and I'm very pleased. What attracted me about Abington was the size of the community, and it really seems to have a lot going for it. And I know that the town is going through some difficult times financially, because of the economy and things that have happened along with the economy. And I'm fortunate because when I was in Narragansett, we had very similar experiences there. And when I was in Arizona, Arizona had some really some difficult times as well. The recession in the 1990s with the savings and loan situation there, we had a lot of issues with high unemployment, development, the economy tanked. And we also had, despite that, a lot of growth. And so it was very difficult for our community to keep up with services. So you think because you're growing, you have revenue coming in and all that, well, it comes in, but it comes in well after the people are already there. So you have to think on your feet and come up with alternatives to fund service delivery. So I think that that's really what makes me a little bit different perhaps than some other candidates, because I understand that, and I know that there are other ways of funding both services and capital and being creative, thinking outside the box. So with that, I'll end my statement, but
Very good, thank you. Mike has the first question.
Yes, Grady, welcome this morning. The first question is, as the town manager, you've obviously faced controversial issues. What's the most controversial issue you faced, and what was the outcome?
well, I had a few. The one that we had had to do with I had to actually terminate an employee. It was a department head. And the department head was well-liked by the staff, but he had some issues. And he had an underperforming department, and he had a bit of anger management issues that I didn't hire him, but I inherited him when I came on. And I basically put him on a performance improvement plan shortly after I came on, because I noticed some issues that he needed to work on, including his anger management. And I also directed him to make some changes. The beach operation was under him, and there were some issues and concerns I had about cash management. There had been some thefts before I was manager, and there had been some minor incidental thefts of cash. And so I brought in our town's auditing firm to help me develop some recommendations to deal with it. And he went along with these recommendations, and then after working with him and meeting with him and finding out how he progressed on those, he basically decided not to implement those, despite having made a presentation to the council that we were going to be doing this. So I guess in my mind, that was probably, in my career, the most controversial situation, because the senior management team really liked this individual, and he was a likable person. But he had run-ins with the community. He had yelled at the public at beach events or during the beach season. That was before I came on. When I talked to him, I saw signs of him becoming angry and blowing up, and I had told him to get anger management help. And when he was in the middle of his performance improvement plan, I asked him how that was going, and he said he never sought the help. So I knew right then and there he was not interested in improving, and it was time to let the guy go. Fortunately, I had really well documented background information all along the way, had our town solicitor review it, worked with HR. He never appealed the termination because it was rock solid. So we didn't have to deal with a wrongful termination suit or an age discrimination suit or anything like that.
Thank you. Kevin?
If I could focus on the form of government in Narragansett, if you could.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, you've had the chance to review the charter of Abington, the form of government that we
Right.
had. Can you explain to me, I guess, first of all, because I'm really not attuned to Rhode Island municipal government.
Sure.
So if you could kind of explain to me the functions of how the council acts, or the executive, legislative, and what your role
Sure.
was there, and how that would extrapolate into Abington based on our charter, if you could.
Okay. In Narragansett, the town is what's considered a council manager form of government. If you think of a corporate structure, the structure is you have a board of directors, and they hire a professional CEO or manager to run the organization, and that's exactly what we had. And it's a pretty common, it's a structure of government that came about as a result of the reform movement at the early 20th century, late 19th century, and it's the most common or the fastest growing form of government in the country. When you go out to the western United States, because they came into the Union much later, that's the predominant government structure, with the exception of large cities, Los Angeles, San Diego. Those are strong mayors. Rhode Island did have some variations. There were some strong mayor communities like Providence and some other communities, Cranston and Warwick. as far as this community, as I understand it, the executive authority is vested in the Board of Selectmen. Major financial decisions are made with the annual town meeting, and the Board of Selectmen hire a professional manager to run the day-to-day activities of the town, and that manager reports to the Board of Selectmen. It's different because there's like one more step that doesn't exist like what we had in Rhode Island and the experiences I had in Arizona and California. I have reviewed the warrants from past years, and I know how that works. And even within Massachusetts, I can tell you that different towns are different on even how their structure is. And one community I had looked at, they actually had a warrants committee that actually drafts up the warrants. Here, as I understand it, it's the Board of Selectmen that come up with the warrants. I'm familiar, I made myself very familiar with the charter, and I believe that I can adapt to this process. I think it's actually, in a way, a good thing. I shouldn't say in a way, I do think it's a good thing, because I think it allows the community to have more input in their local government. And I think I mentioned to a few people at the reception on Thursday night that in the local government management field right now, citizen engagement is the big buzz, trying to find ways to engage your citizens in your local government. And we have a built-in institution here in this community that automatically encourages citizens to be involved, and I think it's great. Now, I understand, too, that the community is having a difficult time trying to get quorums and meet quorums and all that. But I think a lot of that has to do with, it's probably the topics needed to energize people to want to be involved and such. And I realize that that's spelled out as to the types of business that the town meeting deals with. But I hope I answer your
Yeah,
question.
you do. If you could, just as a brief follow-up, in terms of, again, focusing on Rhode Island and the council itself, and in the fact that I'm not understanding, is the council the appropriating body, or would you go to an open town meeting, or how does that work?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't make that clear. The council is the governing body that has the legislative authority. And so the way it works is that we have the town manager gives the direction based on council feedback and input, what council policy direction is on regarding the budget. We typically would do a forecast in the fall about what we were looking at for revenues for the next year. That would be the driver, and the council would then kind of give us some direction as what they would want to see. And then we would, I would give the direction to the department heads. They would prepare their budgets. I would review the budgets with individual department heads. We had a new finance committee that was established when I was there, and so the finance committee, the next step would be to have the finance committee review what was proposed. They would give their either endorsement or their recommendations to the council. Then the council took action on that. And of course, we had a series of public hearings for the public to participate, and we give presentations. So that, I'm sorry, I didn't make that clear.
No, that's just in my own mind. I was trying to equate. As you correctly point out, in Massachusetts, there are different forms and different, and I was unsure in terms of Rhode Island as to whether the council, even though it's styled as such, whether their duties were different in different forms of government.
Yeah, it is different, similar but different in different ways.
Right. Thanks very much.
Sure.
Ken? I'm going to ask some of the same questions that you had in the town manager search for me, some of the ones that
Okay.
show the biggest difference in the four of you folks. Abington has a newly formed union which consists of some of our department heads, such as the assistant town manager. How might this situation affect your ability to manage effectively?
Well, and as I was stating during the interview with the search committee interview, I would be able to work with that arrangement. The concern I have initially is that that it makes it maybe a little bit more challenging to talk freely at a staff meeting amongst the department heads about maybe progress on a union contract or details, or if I'm seeking input, because they may want to try to basically kind of the Me Too kind of thing as well. And so it would be challenging. So I think I would have to be very careful with what is stated, and it's unfortunate because you want to really trust your department heads, and I would give, you know, every opportunity to trust the staff. There's no doubt about that, but it's just, it's awkward, and I guess that is something that I know in California, when I worked there were a number of cities that were moving towards collective bargaining for some of the different management groups. You know, when I was in Burbank, for instance, the mid-management, right as I was leaving, formed an association where they didn't really have the recognition as a union, but they were able to meet and confer on benefits and pay. And that would be taken into consideration. So I'm familiar with it, and I could work within those confines. Just, I think you just would have to just be a little bit more selective on what you're thinking, what you're doing. So I hope I answered it. You know, it's just a matter of they wear both hats too. They're in management, and they're also, you know, bargaining unit members. So that's challenging to work with.
Thank you.
Tom?
Grady, tell us about a conflict you may have had with a superior or a board member. What happened? How did it get resolved? And what would you have done differently the next time?
Sure. I was fortunate. I didn't really have too many issues with the council. I did have a couple council members who did not want to really work with the rest of the council. They tended to be, they wanted to give me direction by themselves on things that I thought were really either management issues or something that the whole council should provide direction on. And so, you know, I would try to inform them that, you know, per the charter, our charter spelled out what the relationships were between both of us, and I try to be diplomatic. I had a situation where I had, after that one individual who I terminated, I was getting pressure from those two individual elected officials to hire a friend of theirs that had a public safety background and not a Parks and Rec background. And since we had such issues with that individual that I terminated, I was wanting to get a really top-notch professional in there and take that department to the next level. So I thought everything was fine with that, and then I found out later that they were very disgruntled over that whole situation, that I didn't want to hire their friend. And then they, from that point forward, then kind of escalated the conflict with us. And, you know, again, I didn't have any backup. I didn't want to discredit them with the other council members. The other council members kind of knew that was going on, but then those two had a third that would often side with them, so there was a majority frequently. So it got to a point where it was best for me to leave, and that's what happened. The council president at the time tried to make it appear that I had misappropriated money. There was funds that the council had approved for water quality testing for Narrow River. They had previously expended money for that purpose for an association that actually used volunteers that sent their samples over to the University of Rhode Island. The council president tried to make an issue of that, and I pretty much was professional and respectful to the council, but I did write a memo that explained what the circumstances were. And I think the court of public opinion realized that it was a farce, what I was going through. And basically, it came to a point where both the council and I realized it was best for me to leave. And I was respectful throughout the entire time. I didn't communicate anything to the public or in writing or anything that would suggest otherwise. And you know, so I left I left as a professional the way I came in as a professional.
Thank you.
Sure.
Brady, I know you've interviewed at a couple of other places, and now you're interviewing here. Is there anything specifically about Abington that attracted you to apply for the position?
Well, I think the size of the community is important to me. I did love Narragansett, and you know, living there, it was a great community. I really like this town. There's been a lot of investment in like the library and you know, a number of things like this building here. And I know that there's more yet that the community wants. And I know that what I really find here is that there's some opportunities in this town for me to actually help the Board of Selectmen manage this town and do some things, make people feel, despite a high property tax rate, that they're getting value for what they're paying. And everywhere I've worked, there's been a high level of customer service. And when I came to Narragansett, that was something the council wanted changed, was to improve the customer service. So I don't know, I haven't heard anything about the customer service, or haven't, in my research, didn't find anything there. But the other thing that's very important to me is continuous improvement. And I think that there's always room in organizations for continuous improvement. And I think that one of the things that I know is that there's a school committee, a school building committee that's looking at some major renovations. And I realize part of it, if it comes out, will be, if it's approved and prioritized, some of it will be paid for by the state. The local taxpayers will pay for the remainder. And I have some ideas on how I can help with that. One of the things that we did in Narragansett, when I got there, the roads were in horrible conditions. And it was unlike other communities. The state roads are usually the worst roads. In our town, the state roads were the best roads. And so basically, I started from the time I was there looking at that, and was able to get our public works staff and engineering staff to work on a pavement management program where we had it studied, and found out, basically, to make a long story short, that our roads were really, as a total, were a C-. We weren't investing enough in the maintenance and upkeep. And I kind of sense that is the situation with maybe some of the infrastructure here in town. And so one of the things that we were able to do was, this went to the voters, you know, after a citizen committee was put together and they prioritized the projects. A $17 million project was approved by the voters by 86%. But a lot of homework went into that. And the other thing that we did was to ensure that we minimized the impact on the taxpayers. We basically, we had our financial advisor and myself take a look at the debt schedule that we had overall for the town. And the way that we had our debt schedule was that we were going to do this over a period of years, so that as the debt was freed up, then we would issue more debt so that we were able to keep the tax rate basically the same. And I think that those are things that can happen here as well.
Thank you. Mike?
Yes, thank you. What has been the most significant achievement in your career so far, and what makes it significant?
Well, there's a few. When I arrived in Narragansett, we had a really bad situation, and I know it was going on here in Massachusetts. It was the economy. The economy was just really in the tank, and state aid was on the chopping block, and the town was trying to muddle through that. The town also was going through paying for making up the difference, the gap with the budget, with reserves. And that's just like a no-no. You just don't do that. You might do that if there's an emergency or some situation, but they had been doing that for about 3 years. So that was something that I identified readily on. We were able to reduce expenses, increase revenues. The first year I was there, we have a very similar tax limitation. It's a 4% increase to levy here. I know it's the max is 2.5 with some exceptions. And we were able to, through negotiations with the collective bargaining units, because we were looking at literally the possibility of doing layoffs. And so I was able to avert layoffs by getting some concessions with the labor unions. And so we basically were looking at losing $2 million. We actually lost $2 million, but we were able to not only recover from that, but also we had excess money that became part of a surplus that went into our town reserves. that was very good that we did that, because we had a couple rating agencies, Standard & Poor and Moody's, contacted myself and the town's financial advisor, and they were pleased that we had done that. And a number of communities hadn't done that, and they were still using reserves, and they were getting downgrades with their credit ratings, particularly with the pension issues in Rhode Island. I also started a very serious discussion with pensions, and to this day, because of me and bringing in a different actuarial firm, they've come up with some options. We had a town pension, not a regional pension like the Plymouth County one, and it's only 57% funded, and there's some state mandates that you have to get it up at least to 60%, and then the goal is to get it over time up to 80% or more. So that, I think those two. The other, if I were to go into, and I'll just be very quick, I mentioned it previously, was the Peoria Center for the Performing Arts in Peoria. That had a lot of moving parts. I had to find the financing, which consisted of a lot of different sources, including community development block grant money. So, 9-year project. It was the centerpiece of the downtown's redevelopment to revitalize the downtown, and it's in every way, since its completion, is a success.
Thank you. Kevin?
Actually, you piqued my interest on, it was kind of dovetail into what my next question was going to
Sure.
be in terms of the economic downturn, and as it related to Narragansett. And you did, but if you could expand a little bit, what specifically were you able to accomplish that was able to pull it together? And it's sort of a three-part question.
Okay.
The second part, and I'd be happy to repeat it if need be. The second part would be, how would you, when you were dealing with that, were you dealing with any independently elected boards or committees, specifically the school department? And lastly, as a result of all of that, and you touched on it, what was the final bond rating for Moody's and Standard & Poor's?
Okay. Well, so I don't forget the bond rating.
That's all right.
It was a AA. It's not
Yep.
the best, but we were able to maintain a AA. And so we did work very closely. In fact, I had excellent working relations both with the school committee and the superintendent. And they were wanting to do some other capital projects as well. They had just gone through kind of a similar process that the town's going through right now on the school building study. They had just implemented that about a year and a half before I came on, so all the buildings had been renovated. They were wanting more because it didn't cover everything, and they were wanting to do the fields and things of that sort. And I worked with them because we were wanting to deal with the streets, because my concern was everywhere you look in communities that are on the decline, it's your public infrastructure. It starts off, your streets decline, then you start seeing things like the parks, and then you see graffiti, and then housing prices drop in value. And then you start having vacancy. It's just, it's just a cycle that happens. So we were able to work through those issues. And in fact, they were getting surpluses in their own budget, and we were basically giving them close to $24 million a year as a transfer, plus they had the additional state aid that they received. So we basically said, we agree that this is something that is important, and we agree that this should be something we do, but we have, the library wants to expand, and so it was more of a prioritization. Let's work together, and so that's what we did. And they actually have a school building committee or capital building committee that meets, and it's very high-powered with, there's an architect, an engineer, and some people that are really smart. And they also worked with a contractor that was on the board. So we were able to work and figure out, what real costs were, and they were able to break down even prioritizations of these projects. So I think that, I hope that answers it.
It does, yeah.
But key back to the economy was really a combination of revenue adjustments and then reductions in benefits and basically keeping the line on salary increases, and that's really what got us through.
And just lastly, if I could, just a very brief follow-up. In terms of the school system, is that a regional school, or are you independent?
It's independent.
Independent, great.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Sure.
Some residents in Abington are very concerned about how to improve and maintain property values. Others are concerned about limiting their tax bill increases, and still others are concerned about a greater investment in our education system. In many ways, these issues are all interrelated. As town manager, how would you attempt to address these issues and prioritize the needs of the community?
Well, I think it's very key to get an idea. You know, I know that it can be done, but it would be great to get an idea as to the needs of the community. I think one of the things that you can do to help improve property values, maybe for the lower and moderate income folks that just might be on fixed incomes, might be retirees or what have you. Where I worked previously, we had what was called a neighborhood pride program, and basically it had a bunch of volunteers that worked together with town staff or city staff, and we were able to get donations of materials from like Lowe's and Home Depot, Walmart, and we were actually able to get the volunteers to do a street and redo the landscaping, freshen up the paint on the homes, and it really made a big impact on the area. There's things, I mean, I'm sensitive to keeping taxes low. Believe me, when I was in Narragansett, we were at like 0.9% of 1% on the tax, you know, rate. So our taxes are a little bit different there, but the point is it was the lowest in the state. It was probably the second or third lowest in the entire state of 39 cities and towns. People don't want their taxes raised, and I understand that. But there's things that you can do that can have impact that either don't cost a lot, or you can utilize grants and go after grants. You just have to, be creative. And I'm not saying that, I'm not a Pollyanna and saying that, oh, you know, it's not an issue. I think that, yes, and you have to always, there's going to be money that the town's going to have to put out. But you can put it out judiciously and not just say, oh, we'll just hire contractors and this will cost so much more money. There's ways that you can do things and accomplish the same things and be successful without putting out a lot of money.
Grady, describe your budgeting experience and methodology. I'm interested in your approach to budget creation and budget management in a municipal environment of constrained revenue growth and costly unfunded government mandates.
Sure. Well, my background is when I started my career, when I was in Burbank, that's probably where I got most of my early budgeting experience. The first department I worked there was the police department, and the police department was a very large police department, and we had a large budget. At that time, it was a $20 million budget, so that's like 1987. So I was responsible for doing the budget for that department. They even had helicopters because we had, what was it, 16 square miles. They want to make sure we're safe, so they had a helicopter program they shared, though, with another city, which was Glendale. So those costs were very high to operate, and fortunately, they were shared with another city. And so I kind of got grounded in early on that, you know, there's other ways of paying for things. Like you should always look for maybe, you know, consolidation or sharing services amongst cities. And when I was in Narragansett, the neighboring town in Narragansett had 85 services and programs that were shared between the town, and they were significant. It ranged from a sewer treatment plant that was based in our town, that we had capacity in, to the senior center that was run in their town. Back to the mechanics of budgeting. What I've learned early on is you have to keep your eye on the revenues. If you don't, and you're just constantly just dealing with the expenditures and just, you know, incrementally increasing year to year, at some point you're going to bring trouble to the town that you're in. So and I mentioned this earlier, what I would recommend that we would do is have a financial forecast each year, and you do it in the fall before the departments even get started on their budgeting, so you know what to expect. And you look at your stable streams of revenue. State aid, I know, has been a little precarious in the past, but I think the last couple of years has probably been within 5%. So you be a little bit more conservative on those revenues. And you look at your property taxes, and the thing that's interesting about property taxes is that they tend to be very reliable. So you can always count on a collection rate of a certain percent, like maybe a 98% or 95% collection rate, and that you use those assumptions. Then you look at the things that you know are your problems, and those tend to be, and I don't mean problems in a negative way, but just you know that health insurance tend to go up, you know, double-digit increases. It's been known to do that. So you try to get an early handle on what is it going to look like for your benefits for your employees, because face it, in a municipality, your salaries and benefits are your major drivers. So you look at where we are and what we anticipate if we were going to give modest increases or no increases, and what the insurance and benefits are going to cost. So you look at that, and then you, based on that, then you have an idea of what you can expect for the next year. And when you're doing the forecast, you try to go out 5 years if you can, but it's the way the economy is. If you did it 5 years ago, you'd have no idea what it was like today. So I mean, you try to do it, but you know that really the next year or two is the best you're going to probably really get with that. Then what you do is your department heads prepare the budgets. They come to me, and I meet with them and the financial team as well, and we go over their budgets. We ask them to justify what they have. We try to, in Narragansett, we try to hold the base budget line, you know, so any supplement, they either had to find revenue to support it, or it had to be self-sustaining. And I would go through there and I would work with the department head, and if I needed to make a cut or an adjustment, I would tell them that, and I would get back to them. And then I realized there's a finance committee here, so the finance committee would want to get involved early on, and I believe that the finance committee and the board of selectmen received probably the draft budget about the same time. So they want to review it, and I believe my understanding of the process here is that they will have the department heads come in and discuss their justifications and what is it they're requesting. And then they come up with what is their recommended budget. And then that goes then to the town meeting as a warrant and is discussed with the citizens. And I believe even the town meeting gets into such things as salaries and things of that sort too. So I don't know if I rambled on, I apologize.
I think you described process, thank you.
Okay.
Grady, it's clear that you've reviewed the town charter, because you're doing very well answering some of the questions, but just to follow up a little bit on what Tom brought up, what do you believe are the fundamental roles under our charter of the Board of Selectmen, the town manager, and the finance committee?
Well, my understanding is that the board is really responsible. They're the legislators here, but they're also the executive. So, and they hire me, it's almost like a team. The board has hired the manager to work for them to execute the policies that they have. They're also looking for the manager to provide, you know, policy guidance and directives, and I think that they're looking for the manager to do a good job of managing the town and letting the board know if there's issues, let them know about the issues before they become problems and surprised by the problems. I looked at the role of the manager, and also there's some other roles as I understand it. I know that the manager's office helps the Board of Selectmen with the licensing, also is involved in procurement, and also with personnel. And also, from what I understand, it looks like maybe even board appointments. There's a shared role there, and it wasn't clear to me, but it appears to me that there's some role there as well. And maybe it might be just assisting the board with that.
And how about the finance? You did go into a little bit previously on Tom's question, but how about the finance committee as far as their role?
I didn't get too deep into it, but from what I understand, the Finance Committee has a major role to play in terms of basically being the group of citizens that are reviewing what the town's finances are. So if maybe the town was considering maybe the possibility of a bond issue that obviously would have to go to the town meeting, but they would need to weigh in on something like that and determine if it's feasible, looking at the debt schedule, if the timing's right, and so forth, before they can make an endorsement or recommendation one way or the other. So, but they have my understanding is they have a very broad role to play as it relates to the town's finances.
Thank you. Mike?
Yes, an important element for effective teamwork is for the team to share a vision and goals. How do you try to achieve this with the teams that you would lead?
Okay. Well, first off, I'd like to start off with the top, and that would be with the Board of Selectmen. And what I would do there, of course, if the board would be open to it, is where I've worked previously in Arizona. The manager basically started doing strategic planning, and I was involved in that process where basically we would have a Friday, Saturday, or a weekend, or maybe during the night, during the week, we would basically have the council share what their vision was, what they wanted to do or achieve in the next, 3 to 5 years. And so what would happen is we had department heads who would actually be there, and they would kind of give briefings on what they saw in their respective areas as the issues that were topical and timely that needed to be addressed during that time period. And so a lot of this, some things, were obvious that would be part of this, but basically we would put together a business plan. So this basically had goals, objectives, and tasks, and people who were assigned. Most of the people who were assigned were the department heads and the manager, but there were some assignments for the elected officials, and that might be some of the intergovernmental aspects, like maybe it took the mayor who served on the regional council for the council of governments to actually influence maybe some policy making at the regional level. So that document then would come back after we would have this session. It would come back to the council for their approval. So I can envision something like that could happen here, where that is then driving the activities for the organization. So budget-related things, so if there's any actions that are in there that require budget resources and so forth, that would be what would be justifying that process. And I know this town, because there's some other moving parts, it would probably maybe even involve the town meeting. So maybe once we have a document, then maybe that would go to, ultimately the town meeting to be ratified by the community. But the thing about that is you have accountability with that. And you have resources that get allocated. And if you can't find the resources, you try to find the resources and be creative. And so it's an action plan. It's a policy document to guide the governance of the town. And I love it. And I think that if it's done well, and by the way that we use this, we had a nominal interactive process with the board or with the council, and that would be, we had this facilitated, so we had a facilitator that would come in and help facilitate the session. And we had basically, based on the visions that the elected officials had, we had index cards that were put on a big board, and the elected officials were all given a number of dots, different colored dots, and they would put their highest priority on those. And those that got the consensus were the ones that ended up being in the plan. So what was good about that is you got the council working, or the governing body working together and agreeing, and they could see firsthand if there wasn't enough support for maybe some council member's pet project or something. They would see that, and they would understand why it didn't make the plan. And then they really would understand why, the manager, if they couldn't come to the manager and ask the manager do that, when the manager could say, well, look, this is what the council has adopted. So I've been involved with it. I actually worked with our mayor and manager in that process, and I'm very familiar with it. I actually did that in Narragansett, and we had a draft plan. I had a council that didn't really want to do it. I had 2 council members that were fighting it because they preferred to go around and do what they wanted without the collective, body. So.
Kevin?
If I could, actually, my question was touched on both in the chairman's, one of his questions to you, and you elaborated a little bit on your answer, but I wanted to explore it further if I could. In terms of, you've taken a look at our charter and you realize the manager has broad authority and the Board of Selectmen is policymaking and licensing. With that said, items that come up under the purview of the manager that may become controversial, what would your policy be in keeping the Board of Selectmen informed so that we don't hear about something on the street, down the supermarket, or
Sure.
barber shop, or what have you?
Well, I'm a firm believer of reports from the manager. And I did that all the time, keeping the council informed of things that I felt that they needed to be informed. And I would have a brief presentation at the meeting. I would have it in a written staff report, and then I would present it verbally to the council. Items that were of a significance that couldn't wait for a council meeting, I would be on the phone or email council members right away. While we didn't have districts in Narragansett, council members took a very active interest in the areas where they live. So if there was a fire in, say, the neighborhood where they live or nearby, I'd make sure that the chief called, when he called me to let me know, either I would call the council member or he would call. But the point is, always want to keep your governing body informed at all times. And so I firmly believe that open communication is best, especially if we're to work as a team. I think that's very important. And so, to try to keep the whole council involved and informed at the same time. A fire might be something where it might just be that one individual that takes an interest in that, but things of a global nature for the town, to keep the full council informed. I did notice the agenda. One of the things I've been really used to, and I took a very active interest in trying to encourage and be more open as a town. And I revamped the agenda process in Narragansett to the point where online the agenda was placed online, and then every agenda item number was hyperlinked so that the public got everything that we had, with the exception, of course, executive session items and so forth. But I envision working with the staff here and making changes, and it wouldn't be very hard to do. And I think that they would be supportive. Of course, I'd want to work with the board to see if they were open to it. But I think that the more you can be open for the public, I think it's always better. And you can never do enough.
Good. Very good, thanks.
Ken? You're probably up to your ears in Abington information, but visiting Abington a couple times, and last Thursday you probably got some input, but what do you consider, or what do you see as the biggest challenge you will face if you were selected Abington's town manager, and how will you address that?
I think it's finances. What I'm hearing, I had a great chance to talk to the town department heads and the staff, and you've got a great staff from what I can see. They know that they're going through some rough times again this budget year, and it's a little crazy for them because they're a little bit in limbo because you have the current manager still here, and as I understand it, the town annual meeting is going to have to be pushed out to June. So it's a little precarious, and they're not really knowing what to expect for next year. And then there's been some cutbacks in other departments, so it's going to be challenging. I think, from what I can tell, it's trying to find the resources to deliver the services for the town. That's going to be first and foremost, and it's going to be a challenge because a lot of the costs that we have are items that are very fixed costs that aren't going away. I had some ideas when I was looking at the medical insurance plan. I had seen that the town has been able to go through an alternative process that the legislature has allowed it to do. And so there was another plan that has saved the town some money, I think something like $500,000 or so, and then the idea eventually would be to try to get on the GIC for the medical. The thing that I've noticed, even looking at the GIC and even the town's plan, and we had something similar in Narragansett, and that is there's no reason why, and I don't understand it, why you can't have, it's like right now, it's either an individual or a family, and the family, there's a huge cost. And if it's just a couple, the town's paying a lot of money for that, as well as the individual employee. There's a thing called tiering, and it's employee plus one, employee plus two or more. And that would really reduce. In Narragansett, what we do there is we have 2 individual policies. So like my wife and I, we have 2 policies, so it's twice the cost. But the family, if we had the family plan, it would be costing the town a fortune. So those are some things I think you can look at to help. We went through a regional energy services contract project in Narragansett with the Washington County Regional Planning Council. That's a mouthful. And we, along with the school department, identified a number of energy efficient projects that would deliver some major savings that would not only pay for the infrastructure costs, but would provide us the additional savings ongoing. And so I know that there's some newer buildings here, but I know the school department has old buildings. And even in new buildings, there's opportunities. And we found even with just like with converting over to gas and things of that sort, there were some significant savings. Even the lighting, lighting, I don't know when the last time the lighting was updated here, but even with this building being built in 98, I think it was, there's been probably like 3 new generations of lighting since that time, where you can, believe it or not, you would have savings. And even though there's fluorescence, from what I can tell in here, there's even more efficient lighting systems and even more, things that you can do to mitigate. So what I'm saying is I would be looking under every rock to find opportunities to save the town money, because I think in the long run, the town really needs that.
Tom?
Yeah, I think, Grady, you sort of answered my next question. This was from Ms. Ryerson. She's the vice chair of the SAGE committee, and she was asking about what your thoughts were in past experience as far as alternative energy for Abington and town buildings in particular, which you just went into. I don't know if there's anything else you might be able to elaborate on
We were
briefly.
looking at, because we were along the coast, we were also looking at wind power as an option. Solar was another. Solar technologies have come such a long ways where you don't have to have necessarily the bright sunny days every day like you would have in the Southwest. Just having a cloudy, gloomy day also would help with photovoltaic technology and other technology. But you have the issues with wind turbines, and people don't want them in their backyard, so you have to kind of balance, what you're trying to achieve. But a lot of the power companies are under obligation to do a backward meter read. So you can actually be a producer, they take your excess, and then they reduce what your bill is for that like amount of energy consumption. So.
Thanks.
Brady, this is the last question of the round. So, and you did talk about an employee situation earlier, but how typically do you confront employees when their results are unacceptable? And outside of the example you did give us, can you give us an example of when you have done so?
Right. I do, actually, and it's important. When I came to Narragansett, throughout my entire career, with the exception of Narragansett, I've always worked where there's been a performance appraisal system for employees. Narragansett did not have one for their employees. I was able to negotiate it for the middle management group. I was in the process of trying to get it for the rank and file ASME members. The department heads had never been evaluated. So I think it's important to have a process in place, and reading the personnel rules, it appears that there's an outline of that process here. But it's important to have that and provide feedback. And the way I work is I don't like to wait for a whole year to provide the feedback. I like to do it on the front end, get to know the individual who would be working for me, work on some goals and objectives, and basically work on them together, and hopefully let them do it, and then add maybe some others. and then give feedback along the way. I did have a situation with another department head, actually. It was the finance director when I came to the town. I had some concerns shared and relayed to me. I had my interview in an executive session, and so they were able to tell me some things about some of the staff that I was going to be encountering. But they agreed to let me just monitor it and make my own decisions on what I saw. But the finance director, he was not competent. And having worked with staff in other cities before, he missed every milestone as far as key dates to provide the council the budget. I offered to help come in on a weekend to help him get what he needed done, and he said no, he had it all under control. And so he basically made the council look bad, he made me look bad. He didn't have the respect of his staff. In fact, there was issues with him with just that. And then I had an issue I tried to resolve for our Land Conservancy Trust. They had some concerns that the town hadn't been contributing money to their trust as it was supposed to. And when they did an accounting, they thought it was maybe short a couple $100,000. So I asked him to go back, and his background was accounting. I figured he can go back and figure this out. And he just kept looking at the audit reports and the summaries and not going back into getting his hands dirty to look at what those numbers should be. And so I had to let him go. But I gave him an opportunity to improve, and he still didn't. So I really, at the most part, the department heads handled their disciplinary matters, and then I ultimately would get involved if there was a grievance that would go up the chain of command, and I would get involved. So I was very fortunate. I think we had a personnel appeals board, so any disciplinary action or any termination could be appealed to the personnel appeals board. And the entire time I was there, I only had 2 items go before the personnel appeals board, and they were frivolous. They weren't terminations at all. So, and one of them lost and one was sustained.
Thank you. So that's the end of our questions, the round of questions. One question we've been asking the other candidates: have you seen anything that concerns you as far as taking the position if the position is offered to you? Do you have any concerns as far as the
Not concerns. I think
goes, or,
not at all. I mean, I know that there are, like I mentioned earlier, financial concerns. I know that with the recent reorganization with some of the employees with Parks and Recreation, I think they're the field employees that went over to Public Works or the Highway Department. It seems like they're a little short right now, but I think we can try to look at what the service levels are and what the needs are, and ascertain what's necessary. I think that there's some needs here in this community, and yet people are concerned about their taxes. And the other night when I was at the meet and greet reception, there were some concerns from people asking me my opinion about overrides. And I guess that's a naughty word here for some folks. And my response back is I explained that I'm not one that takes overrides very gently. I feel that if all the different folks, the governing body and myself, feel that there is such a major dire need that needs to be addressed, and there's no other way to do it, then overrides, I would say, would be fine. But it's going to be the exception and not the norm. It's not, and from what I understand, that what happens is that some folks tend to go around the town meeting process, and then they try to get an override on the agenda, and I'm sorry, on the ballot, and go around that way. So I think that the deal is to try to find the ways to accomplish where there's some of these needs, and how we can pay for them, and not really stretch the budget and not really hurt the town as far as services. Something I mentioned during our search committee interview was a tool that I have used before, both in Narragansett, and I did it extensively in Arizona, was we did a survey every couple years of residents, trying to understand what their satisfaction levels were with the municipal services. And basically, they were asked a variety of different questions about a number of different city and town services. And they gave us back their feedback, and it was done statistically by a firm, and it was about $15,000 to do this, but it had a plus or minus accuracy of 4%. And it was very good because, as I was telling you before, I'm all about continuous improvement, and those departments that had low scores, it gave me some empirical data as to maybe why they're underperforming or why their expectations are so low or not being met. And so that information was able to be translated into, like as an example, in Peoria, the community was growing at such a fast rate that the north part of the town, which had other means of paying for roads, the developers were paying for the new roads and streets up in the north end. The people in the southern part of the town were saying, hey, they got all new roads and so forth. Well, the people in the north end, those roads were coming in fast enough, and they were saying that they were tired of the congestion and all that. Well, we were able to use that information to determine if we needed to actually bump up our street improvement program, and that's what we did. We were able to get a dedicated sales tax passed by the voters of 0.3%. In Narragansett, because of the economic situation, the survey also asked people if you were willing to have reductions in services, what areas would you want to have reductions? And this was a very powerful tool because, like I said, we were looking at service reductions, possible layoffs if we didn't get concessions. It was a great tool, and that information, I think, it's good every 2 years to do it. And the idea is to continuously improve, but also in this situation, I would think it would be important because maybe what was interesting, believe it or not, one of the first highest rated service was fire, the second was police, the third was library. And of all the services that the town, and one of the lowest were streets, and that's what justified us going forward with the street improvement program. But what was interesting is the library was also the one area that the people were more willing to cut. And I was just like, it just seemed like they're the happiest with it, but yet more likely to cut it. And I was like going, this is really strange. And it's a very similar arrangement. The library is kind of semi-independent of the town, receives funding from the state, but also from the town, and has its own board that runs the library. So anyways, I'm sorry, I got a little carried away with it.
Do you have any questions of us?
I just want to let you know I'm very serious about this position. I've done a lot of my research and work on this. My wife and I have actually been out to the town about 4 times, and I'm very serious about it. It's a commitment that if I were to be offered this job, I would be more than a manager. I would actually be active in the community. My wife and I, where we are now, we're both very active in our church. I was very active and still active in the Lions Club. Very active. I helped resurrect our historical society, and I was on the board of a local museum that's based in our town. So the idea is that you would get me after hours representing the town as well, and not being high profile, but not being invisible either, and to the point where people would know that the manager is just an average Joe like they are, and I can volunteer and work and do things that they do as well. So I think what I'm trying to say is I would be more than just a manager, and I would also be looking to relocate to the town as well. So.
I'm going to take that as your closing statement?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Our fourth candidate is Paul Shue, and I'm just going to introduce the members to you, Paul.
Okay.
Andy Burbine, Mike Franey, Kevin Donovan, Ken Coyle, and Tom Dion. And the procedure today, we're going to have you give a brief opening statement if you'd like, and we're going to do a round of questions, actually 3 rounds of questions among the board.
Okay.
Then you'll have the opportunity to ask us some questions if you would like, and then if you'd like, you can do a closing statement.
Okay.
And we are discussing the appointment on Monday night, this Monday night at our regular meeting.
Oh, okay.
If we do make a decision that night, we'll contact all the candidates,
Okay.
yea or nay. So before you leave, if you can just give me a good phone number to reach you at, so I can get
Fine.
in touch with you.
Sounds great.
All right, so the floor is yours, and
Well, let me first thank you for your time. I'm always humbled by the fact that people volunteer their time. You have a beautiful Saturday morning. You could be doing 90 other things other than meeting with this person talking about being a town manager here. And I know you've been at this all morning, so it's been kind of a busy day for you. But you've seen my background, so I'm not going to rehash that with you unless you want something for the public to see. I think you know what my experience is. I've got to say, though, relative specifically to Abington, that I thought your search committee did a really nice job. The first thing they did is they made it very comfortable to talk, to have a conversation with them. And that's not always the case sometimes. And I think it's much better to do it that way, because the worst thing to do is that you interview person A and then the person B shows up for the job. You want to know who you're talking with. And so I think they help facilitate that a great deal. It's a bit unusual for the Thursday night meet and greet stuff, but I liked it. I thought it seemed to flow fairly seamlessly with folks. And it gave people a chance to actually nose to nose some of the folks you're talking to. So I thought that was a good idea. My wife is Gail. She is an aquatic biologist by training. She's a scientist by training. She ended up working for Putnam Financial because the methodology in biology is fairly applicable to financial investments a lot of times, and it paid better. So we have 2 grown children. One works at Tufts University in medical school. She's not a physician. She's in the administrative support staff. The other works in the IT department at Framingham State University. And we've had, through no planning on my own part, 3 grandchildren in the last 3 years. So that's and they're all right in this area. So that's certainly a draw for me for this specific area. So that's more of the human side of it,
Okay.
as opposed to the.
great, thank you. So Mike has our first question.
Okay.
Yes. What's the most controversial issue you face as a town manager, and what was the results?
We've had, there's anything that's sizable can be controversial. The creation of the industrial parks in Franklin initially was controversial because there was great stress on the town council there to allow housing essentially at the intersections of 495 and the council was really strong on wanting to do job creation. And also they realized that if they bumped up housing substantially, that in the end, it would end up costing a lot more money because it costs more to educate children than it does than you receive in property taxes typically. So those 2 intersections today are kind of a monument to, it's funny, it was initially controversial, and then once it occurred, once things came together, I think people said, look what we've done. And so that was one. There are many controversial things along the way, but that was a big one. That turned out to be a $700 million public-private agreement. So,
Good. Thank you.
Kevin?
Welcome. You have had management experience in actually 3 states, Massachusetts, New York, and Connecticut, and I'm sure you've had the opportunity to view our charter in terms of the authority and our structure of government. Can you, in your last posting as city manager in Rye, can you give me a flavor for what, is Rye a conventional city where you have councils that elected? Do they appoint the manager, or does the mayor?
yeah,
I want a flavor of what your experience was, I guess.
that's a more conventional council manager form of government. I think you were administrator, if I remember correctly. Yes. That was a traditional council manager form right out of the reformist program set forth by Richard Childs. So that was, so each community has a different approach. Part of it is the charter, and part of it is custom. When I came to Franklin, Franklin had just converted to a town council form of government. Maynard Gosney was just before me. And Maynard, as a first manager, and I've done that as well in Connecticut, had the unenviable position of making some of the conversions there, which is the reason he ended up leaving. And when I came on the scene, I followed him. The town still had a moderator, but it wasn't a formal position moderator. It was an informal, and the informal opinion leader actually had probably as much power and as much influence in the community as did the formal positions that were yet new. And so every place has been a little different. Connecticut had a modified town meeting, so we had everybody attend. There was an amphitheater in Rocky Hill where you would, the school superintendent and I would give the presentations on the budgets. The schools would always go first, would vote, and then everybody would leave, and then the people remaining would finish up the rest of the town budget.
So I guess, and you've answered the question, I guess I wanted to get a flavor for our form of government and
Yeah.
where you've been and what you've done, and obviously you've done the breadth of it,
Yeah.
so, thank you.
Thank you.
Ken?
Abington has a newly formed union which consists of some of our department heads, such as the assistant town manager. How might this situation affect your ability to manage effectively?
I've worked in environments that were completely organized, union collective bargaining units, and it's there was a term, as you know, I've done a lot of work in other countries, and actually I've learned more from them than I imparted. I thought I would end up teaching some public administration things with other people in other countries. And in South Africa, they had a term called Sankofa. Sankofa is that when something's out of whack, in order to right it once again, you have to go back to where it went out of balance and straighten it up from the out of balance and bring it forward. So my question to myself was, when I saw that you had people organized right up through your department head structures, is why is that? Because that's not generally the case, and there must have been some reason for that to have occurred. It would be good to take a look back and see if that is unwindable, because it tends to impede a lot of, the more constraints you have, the more difficult it is to do work, and it's already difficult to do work in the public sector as it is. So, is that responsive?
Yep, thank you.
Tom?
Paul, could you tell us about a conflict you might have had with a superior or board member? What happened, what was the results, and what might you have done differently in that situation?
Well, and you all know that a manager is obliged to stay out of politics. You have to have a neutral competency that you bring to the job, and you have to stay away from those things. And sometimes when there's changes of elections, you'd like to participate, and you cannot do that. You are prohibited from doing that regardless of what the situation is. I've had situations where I've seen I'm not talking about things that are illegal, just illogical sometimes. And you can make the case as the manager, but you have to step back and say, okay, the legislative people are in charge, that it's their show. And they've presented some good challenges, and they've presented some difficult challenges. The most difficult one is having a new council elected, and everything that you had worked for seems to go in reverse, and that's kind of what happened in Rye. And so you look at that and you say, okay, that's that's not my call. That's someone else's call to do those things. I'll tell you how I work with boards, and generally speaking, I've done this for 30 years, and it's been far and away very successful. Everybody gets the same information at the same time, and they're treated the same way. I tend to work with a mayor or a chair more closely because we would work with agendas and doing things, but for the most part, everybody gets the same information at the same time. If someone comes in and it's a pothole issue, if it's a minor issue, of course, we can deal with those things on just a one-to-one basis, but if someone starts coming in asking for a lot of reports or information, then it needs to be the entire body that does that. Otherwise, your time allocation is skewed, and one person has a lot more information than everybody else, which is not a good condition. So, is that responsive?
Thank you.
Paul, you've been town manager at a number of different places. Your last one was in Rye, and that was in 2009. You left there.
Yes.
And now you've been in the private sector.
Yes.
I do know that you've applied at a couple of other places, at
Yes.
least I know Bridgewater. Is there anything about Abington that attracted you to apply for this position specifically, or?
First, I haven't applied for all the positions in the area, even though I've been a candidate in a couple different ones. I've had a couple things happen that I guess occur in your life, and generally speaking, I've really been blessed with a career. I've had a great career working and managing cities. I've met a lot more good people than I have ornery ones, and I'm very happy with that. But I've had something happen the last couple of years since leaving Rye, had nothing to do with Rye, and that is I've got 3 grandchildren now, 3, 2, and 1, and they're in this area. So my decision personally is to trade off status and income for proximity to grandchildren. It's just that simple. It's not a whole lot more complicated.
I appreciate the honesty. And that's a good reason, too. So.
It's a great reason.
Yes. Mike?
Yes. Paul, what has been the most significant achievement in your career so far, and what makes it significant?
It's going to sound kind of strange, and it's not a big monetary achievement, but when I'd have to say that I've had some really good, solid management teams, and they've over time, they've ended up being self-policing in a lot of cases because they all have to carry their weight, and if one of them doesn't, they'll pick on each other to carry their weight. When I left Rye, it was not a pleasant leaving, and the last meeting I had with my senior managers was, you have to stay out of this business because it's a political business, and that's not what you're here for. You're a manager. And I've got to say that every one of the managers stayed away from that, kept continuously delivering services, and I think I was pretty proud of that. And I think that if you measure your success a lot of times by things after you're gone, not when you're there necessarily, and I think that was a pretty good outcome. They had a good ethical background.
Thank you. Kevin?
We've recently, at the beginning of 2009, late 2008, hit the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. I think that can be argued. And I know you were in Rye in 2009, but even I noticed going back to when you were in Rocky Hill, Connecticut during the early 90s, we had, similar tough constraints. So I guess, can you just give us your philosophy on how you dealt with that? If it was in Rye, how you dealt with the limited funding, or if necessary, Rocky Hill during the 90s.
Sure, thank you. The 5 years I managed Rocky Hill, we never increased taxes because the council's mantra was, we do not want tax increases. Now that's partly a little deceptive because we were able to engineer new growth, and the new growth added to what they called the cherry sheet, and so that gave us some additional money to cover some of the ongoing repetitive expenditures of the organization. But I'd have to say that typically, I can't recall a time when we've had a situation that was flush, that we didn't have to be concerned with taxation. And Rye began, when I started in Rye in 2003, the main thing that was running, that the council had run for, was cutting taxes and reducing costs. And they were a very sharp group of people, and I've got to say I really enjoyed working with them, because I learned a lot from them. These are people who run the Wall Street firms and had their own hedge fund companies, and they knew a lot about money. So you could say anything you wanted to, but you had to be able to back it up. And so we began cutting budgets in 2003. So when the downturn hit, they were pretty well positioned to deal with those types of things.
Very good, thanks very much.
Ken?
Some Abington residents are concerned about how to, is that the right question? Yes, it is. To maintain property values. Others are concerned about how to limit tax bill increases, and still others feel an immediate need for greater investment in our education system. In many ways, these issues are all interrelated. As a town manager, how would you attempt to address these issues and prioritize the needs of the community?
You know, I heard a lot about that Thursday evening, and it was that was probably one of the virtues of the meeting, which is you expect to hear a great deal of that. I think you have some bragging rights in Abington. Just to name a couple, you've got 17,000 square foot building here that's in great shape. Library, same thing. Senior center, 14,000 square foot building, good shape. Relatively new police station, 16,000 square feet. So you've got those underway. Now comes the feasibility study you have with the middle school, I believe it is, and what are your persistency tables going forward? I see the MAPC and Old Colony did projections for your population growth between now and 2025. How you deal with those, and how do you deal with that in a declining basis? In the large picture, there's one of two things. Increase the base, the tax base, which is one of the questions that came up. How do we increase it? I know you've done tax increment financing on, I think, the lumber company, if I'm correct, and you've drawn in some things, but you have challenges at the other end of it with your wastewater treatment system, some fairly severe constraints about effluent. And so you have to figure those out, and I don't have the answers to those, but my guess is that you can find a way for those answers, but it's going to take some better knowledge and working of the working parts than I can give you right here, but I understand the dynamics surrounding it. And they are findable, they're resolvable, but no one person's going to come in and say this is how it works. It's going to be a collaborative effort.
Tom?
Paul, a little bit dovetailing on that answer. Could you describe your budgeting experience and methodologies? I'm interested in your approach to budget creation and budget management in a municipal environment of constrained revenue growth and costly unfunded government mandates.
Well, we can wring our hands all we want to about mandates, but that is going to be a decision made generally at another level, sometimes outside of the community as well. So the question is, how do you contend with things like stormwater discharge and MS4 and the legacy cost that the community has many times, which you may or may not have established yourself. And you're part of a mosaic of a much bigger picture here in the South Boston area. There's going to be an accommodation among and between the towns. You've done some of these things already. From little tiny things, I see you got a free fire engine and Jaws of Life, small things, maybe they don't, but they add up, to people that, and I'll just recite some of the, I don't know that it's verified, but the energy savings and reducing your operational cost. Those may not be enough, even when you add all those up, and there may need to come some reckoning of what are your core services, what kinds of services do you want to provide, and what are you willing to pay for. And that's a conversation that's going on around the country in a lot of places, because the things that we've always taken for granted may not be things that are going to be continued into the future. And those are community by community by community types of decisions. I'll give you an example in Rye of one that deals with that exactly. We had a 40-acre patch in the center of the city. It was a conservation area. And the council felt that we were spending way too much money on that because you had to have people maintain the trails. There was a habitat in the center of it that the city owned, the conservationists lived on. And the council said that really is not a core service of this community. And it took about 4 years to do it, but over time what we were able to do is contract the service with an affinity grouping called the Friends of the Nature Center, and use slack time from our golf employees for maintenance of trails, use the facility in the Nature Center for the greenskeepers lodging, because the golf course wanted to do that anyhow, and ended up with 0 employees over a period of time. So that was a planned event, so that nobody was laid off, nobody was fired, but we were able to bring down the full-time employee population because legacy costs are so high, and that's not different than it is here.
Thank you.
Paul, based on your review of Abington's Town Charter, what do you believe are the fundamental roles of the town manager, the Board of Selectmen, and the Finance Committee?
The Finance Committee was alive and well in Franklin when I was there, and I would hope that it functions kind of like the same here. And that is that we had a Finance Committee. The town accountant was sort of my right-hand person in finance. We worked with the Finance Committee to noodle through a lot of the different things that were going on in the community, put together the budgets, and that functioned pretty well from bringing in outside information into the organization. The selectmen I would see pretty much as the group that sets the direction for things, and that is if you see we have constraints in Massachusetts, Prop 2.5, but if you see areas that we need to take a look at or venture into, much like a council in that regard, then those are the kinds of things I would hope to get some direction on and talk about it. And there's a back and forth to that typically. You may say, well, we need to go over here, and we'd say, okay, this is where we can go, these are the implications. Do you still want to go there? Are those, here are your options for these. And so that it would be a directional basis with the Board of Selectmen that I would see. It would be line operation assistance with finance, and the policy formulation ideally would be something that would be, it's your call, but hopefully it's a back and forth. Here's what we think. These are the options. These are the implications of doing it that way. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Mike?
Yes. An important element for effective teamwork is for the team to share a vision and goals. How do you try to achieve this with the teams that you would lead?
We had, I had an unfair advantage in New York because we had the GE Crotonville Center in the city I mean in Ossining. It was right there. So we had world-class trainers from around Earth that were there, and they allowed us, that's where Jack Welch would take everybody for training. If you were anybody in GE, you were at GE Crotonville. That's where the training took place. And so we tapped into that. They allowed us to do that because we were a host community to GE. And so we used that with both our senior staff and with the Board of Trustees in that city. And I also used it when I left Rye. They let me use it one more year as a gift. And so what they did, that GE specializes in what's called a change acceleration process. The CAP program is something that Welsh focus on. Anybody can make change, but not many people can make change stick. In fact, a lot of people institute change and it just moves everything backwards. So how do you make change stick? For them, for selling products, it was how come we have these great products that we're putting out the market, and we've done a tremendous job building these products, but they're just not moving. Why is that? You know, what's going on? It's not indifferent from us. So we used the change acceleration process, actually, to relocate the police and courts facility in Ossining. And we did that. We had, and I'll abbreviate the conversation, but we had 9 different interest groups in an area downtown that was the worst area in that community. We had 150 unidentified shots per year in that section of town. And so we said, this is an area where probably it's a good place to put the police and court facility in a lot of respects. Each of the 9 groups we met with, and we began building sort of like a small charrette with them. But we measured out how likely it was that that would occur, and the groups, as it turns out, after thoroughly understanding what was going on, turned out to be extremely supportive of having the police and court facilities down there. Biggest single group that I had trouble with was police department. And when we put the facility in, we put a community center meeting room in the police department. Nobody had assigned parking. Nobody had protected parking. Everybody's parking was out in the open. And it, in the end, didn't present any problem whatsoever. But it was, you know, and that area today now has 2 high-rise apartment buildings on each side of it. This is a place that hadn't any investment at all prior to that. It has across the street luxury condominiums. So they've had over $100 million of investment in that area since then.
Thank you.
Kevin?
You touched on a little bit in terms of communication, and I'd like to further explore that with you if I could, based on your philosophy. In the Abington Town Charter, as you've had the opportunity to look at, the manager is charged with a goodly amount of authority, and the Board of Selectmen is sitting as the policymakers licensing board. And I guess in terms of issues that may come up on a daily basis under the purview of the manager, but may become controversial over nature, what would your policy be in terms of interacting with the selectmen to ensure that we don't hear something on the street, down the supermarket, barber shop, or what have you?
Yeah. We used 9 different techniques in Rye because communication was a very big issue, and so we paid a lot of attention to it. And I can assure you that no matter how much you try with the speed of electronic communication, there will be something that slips through the cracks and gets to you before it does us, because it's just impossible to keep in front of it. But I'll give you the kind of the standard bearers. Each month we put together what was called a project update. The project update was an actual written compendium by popular name index of the major projects going on in the community. And it was just a sentence or 2. It was just a snapshot. The counselors, quite honestly, would say, this is my phone directory guide, because each month I can put this by the phone, and if I get a call from a constituent, I can flip through it while we're talking, and I've got something that I can talk about. Because I would not expect people to have at the tip of their fingers every project going on. And these are the major projects. And at any given moment, you're going to have 30 or 40 different projects. Those were prepared by the various departments. And each of the meetings of the selectmen, afterwards I'd have a meeting with the managers to talk about what happened, what's policy direction, what's administrative issues do we have popping up, and then for the good of the order on the round robin, what makes sense in between the departments. So that was a monthly publication, went out each month, and it gave everybody kind of a telephone directory of popular name indexed projects. Depending on what the situation was, if we had 2 major floods in Rye, and we had a tropical storm event in Ossining, and all these were presidential declarations. So in those cases, we had, in some cases, up to the hour contact, because people wanted to know what was going on from the EOC outward. That's kind of an extreme, because that's all you're doing is pretty much trying to pull together information, kick it out to the legislative group, and then get it out to the public at large. We had weekly memos that would go out to the council when we would send up the agendas that would give sort of a less formal, here's where we see things going on, this is what we hear. And so that was just sort of a constant back and forth. And there were other techniques that we used, but it was traditionally, it was the project update that was the stalwart throughout everything. Weekly memos that was not as detailed, but sort of here's the drumbeat for right now, and then up to and including hourly things when we had emergency situations.
Great, thanks very much.
Ken? What do you see as the biggest challenge you will face if you were selected as Abington's town manager, and how will you address it?
The first order of business for me is learning more about the organization and what makes it tick. This is my sixth visit here, and I know enough to know that I don't know that much. You know, some of you have been on in public service here, I know, since the mid-'80s. So you're going to know more. You're going to have a different view of this community than I'll ever have a chance to know of. I might have a different view because I'm looking at it from a different perspective. You know, sometimes not knowing something can't be done is not a disadvantage. You know, you can blunder into something that actually works that didn't used to work. So I think the big challenge right now is going to be to find that Sankofa that I was telling you about. Try to understand things that are going on and why they're going on before you run in and try to change things, because you may not really want to change it, or if you do, you might change it and move it all backwards instead of making it stick.
Thank you.
Tom?
Paul, this question is from Miss Ryerson. She's the vice chair of the SAGE Committee, which is our green group. And
Okay.
your question is, Abington is working to become a green community. Describe any areas of your past experience that would help us accomplish this goal. And in general, what are your thoughts and suggestions on alternative energy for Abington as a whole and for the town buildings in particular?
Well, I know you've done stage 1 on your energy audit, and I had the pleasure of meeting a couple folks Thursday evening. We talked about what was going on. They're ready to get going on stage 2. You know, the energy issues, and I've been following the issue in Falmouth with the wind turbines, and it's not as easy as it seems. It's just like cell towers with electromagnetic fields and the issues that spill out of technology that we are not aware of when we start them. One of the things I think that helps the community, and I had, at the end of this, I'll share some comments that I had without attribution to anybody that I listened to and heard. But I thought one of the things that you have that's an ace up your sleeve is that, and it may sound a little overly simple, but the comment was, you know, we're really happy with who we are. You know, we're not trying to be somebody else. And there's a certain amount of goodness in that, I think you might say. I've worked with branding, and branding can be kind of exciting. It can be very frustrating. More often than not, tends to be something that doesn't work in communities, but I have had it work in a community I managed long ago. They still use the same brand, and it's still a lot of fun, and they still enjoy it, and they market it. But it's one of those, I had a training session on branding about a year ago with communities. What is your brand? Maybe the brand, you know, can be, in some cases, you know, we have a good community. We're proud of it. Maybe that's something along those lines. But I don't know if that answers your question. But that's kind of who are we? What do we want to be? Where do we want to go? Everybody wants to balance the budget. Everybody wants to have, you know, good quality services and exceptionally low prices. But what do we stand for?
Thank you.
Paul, how do you typically deal with employees when their results are unacceptable? And can you give us an example of when you have done so?
Well, I try to rehabilitate them first. You'd be surprised how many times someone will come in and say, Joe isn't doing a job, and say, okay, what is it? And we'll talk about it. And when it finally comes down to talking to that person about their job, they may not fully understand that they weren't doing a job. Maybe somebody didn't tell them what the job was. Maybe they didn't lay it out. Maybe Joe wasn't doing the job and he was very crafty at being able to get around those corners. But my assumption initially is that people generally like to work and like to be proud of the work that they do. And so that's the approach to take working with people. So you try to rehabilitate them, try to get them, and it could be on us, could be that we haven't laid out what they're supposed to do. And we've just sort of expected that they would do something that maybe we didn't really point out needed to be done. I have had those situations occur, and I'll be candid, I view them a little bit as a failure on my part or the organization's part as much as theirs in some cases, because we hired them, somebody hired them, they're here, and if the job changed and we didn't have them change with it, maybe that was part of our fault as well. And I've had that happen in lesser jobs. I've had it happen in department head jobs, both ways. I try to avoid that. I try to avoid it by rehabilitating them, or if there's an outplacement possibility. Sometimes people are in a job and they're good people and they're working hard, but it's just not their cup of tea. And if you can recognize that, and if they can recognize it, maybe you can make that kind of a change. The best policing that I've had with senior management personnel, though, has been with other senior management personnel. If you're working correctly, if you have a management team working together, most of the projects here in Abington and in all communities involve more than one department. You're not going to do a major project here, even minor projects in Abington, with just one department's involvement. It's going to involve everybody. If those men and women are working around the table on a routine basis and know each other, if one of them is not pulling their load, the other ones will inform them in fairly direct ways about, and they can do it in ways better than I can, because they can say, hey, I've been waiting for your report from the building department because I can't do anything until it gets done, until I get it. And so they tend to be pretty good. If it's working right, they tend to be very self-policing in a lot of things. And that's some of the best incentive programs that I've come across.
Great. Thank you. And that completes our round of questioning. I do have another question for you. Have you found anything in your investigation or in your meeting on Thursday night or today or that would give you any concerns as far as if the job was offered to you, taking the job? Do you have any concerns that you'd like to let us know about as far as your ability to take the job? Or?
No. I found some interesting things, and I don't know if they make any sense or not, but I've come across some interesting things. I'm at that point where I have more questions than anything else. But I've got to say I was impressed with your screening folks, and it's been sort of that way throughout. And that is that some folks think that the best way to interview is to be intimidating, and it's always a mistake, because you can get a good performance by somebody and then end up with another person that you ended up hiring. So this kind of give and take, I think, is very productive. And it gives you a chance to see who I am, and it gives me a chance, because we end up spending a lot of time together. I mean, on tense things sometimes, and I don't want somebody that is uncomfortable to work with, because it takes all your energy just to keep in front of things generally.
Do you have any questions of us, the board, or any?
I had a couple of things just to share with you,
Sure.
if that's okay?
Yep, absolutely.
And it won't, I know you've been at this all morning.
No, that's
so I
okay.
wanna, there's nothing profound here. And I've got one for the clerk. Great. So that's for the city clerk.
Here.
I thought your handbook was pretty good. The handbook talks about, goes back to 1712. I know you had technically the birthday last year, but I understand there's another one underway for this year. But that sweep of time, 1712, 2012, 2013, is kind of the thing we deal with. It's very different from a lot of places. It's been around for a long time, and hopefully going to be around for a long time to come. And so decision-making becomes a little bit different in that regard. I talked about the search committee. I think that was a great job. I'm going to go back to, and I promise not to be long, but Aristotle. And Aristotle was asked to define politics, and he said it's the great conversation. And this is the great conversation. Now, he didn't have email. He didn't have tweets. So he may have changed his opinion with those kinds of things. But I think that that conversation has become more important and more difficult all at the same time. The increase in technology arms everybody to the teeth with any kind of information that you want to find to support almost any kind of case you want to support. And one of the things that I've done with the managers in the past, and it was not my idea, it came from a guy named James Comey, who I ran into in Westchester County. He just finished prosecuting Martha Stewart. And a guy named Gigante, who was the mob boss in New York City. So Mr. Comey was giving a presentation to the Westchester County officials, and he said, he said it was easy, relatively speaking, to prosecute Martha Stewart because she just had scads of emails, and emails are eternal. So his advice, and I'll tell you, I've given this lecture every year to my senior managers and to the council, so bear with me. Unless you think you're really a good writer, email is not such a hot idea. And it's not communicating. Communicating requires two people, sender and receptor. You may not get a receptor when you send email. It may not go where you think it is. What the message that you had may not be the same that you thought it was. And so Comey's comment was, Martha Stewart was easily prosecutable because she had all these tons of emails. Gigante, the crime boss, walked around in a bathrobe and talked with his hand over his mouth so the parabolic mics couldn't get him. He said we had a heck of a time with him. So communication is sometimes overrated and understated at the same time. We have to think about what we're doing. And the one thing that I've advised my staff to do, and I've been doing it now ever since meeting with Mr. Comey, was if you can see somebody in your offices, unless you have a sheet of data, you're going to send them, talk to them, don't email them, go over and talk with them. If they're in the building, talk to them or call them, do something, but don't play tag with email because that happens all too often, and people send things out. So that's just my rant, but it's one I believe in, and I think that I've got a good basis for believing it. Let's see. I talked a little bit about energy efficiency, wastewater, the landfill closure, all this stuff that you already know about. I won't bore you with it. The question I was asked was, why am I the best manager of the group? I know of all the other candidates, and I'm not saying that I'm better than anybody else. I'm different, and I think that they're all diligent folks and have worked hard in businesses, and so this comparative I'm better than somebody else is kind of irrelevant in a way. What's relevant is what fits your community at this time in history. And I think that's what to pay attention to. That's really pretty much it. So, thank you for
We appreciate your time.
Very good.
Well, appreciate your
Very
time. And,
Thank you.
and we can enjoy the rest of this nice day.
Yes.
Thanks very much. Nice talking to you.
Good luck.
Yeah, thank you.